time for Retargeting Podcast. I'm your moderator, Ella. Tonight we have another interesting guest. His name is Chris Burton. First off, if you're new to the call, please stay on and we'll get you some additional support, some TalkShoe podcast numbers, and some helpful links and websites. This is a solutions and educational-based podcast, but the views and opinions of my guests are not necessarily my own personal views and opinions. Basically, I'm open to many perspectives and many views on targeting. So as I stated right there, they're not necessarily my own views, but I'm always willing to kind of adjust my opinions. And, I have an open mind, so I'm willing to listen to all points of view. And I want to share them with other people as well. My goal is that everyone can obtain something out of tonight, especially a feeling of empowerment. If you have any suggestions, comments, questions, or especially if you're in need of additional support, please don't hesitate to email me at tiangel2016@gmail.com. Again, that's tiangel2016@gmail.com. Sorry if I've been a little delayed in responding. It's been a kind of a rough couple of weeks, but I'm going to try and get back on the ball and respond as soon as I can to people. And if I don't get back to you, you can always try Terry at stopgangstalkingcrimes.com. He sometimes has a little extra time, although he's extremely busy as well. I just want to make sure that if someone's in need of support, that we can address it right away. Because some people really seem to be in crisis, and I want to make sure we can get to you and help you in any way that we can. So a little bit about Chris. Chris Burton was the founder of two Silicon Valley IT staffing and consulting companies and had an art gallery for local Denver artists when he became a victim of America's classified Manhattan District electromagnetic neuroweapons development non-consensual experimentation program. Trapped in a psychotronic research lab he could not escape from, he founded 3 charity fundraising companies in hopes of appealing to the humanity of the U.S. government, which chose to further the covert ambitions of its intelligence agencies and continue the program. Okay, so now he's here to discuss the neuroweapon technology and talk about V2K and also the possibility and creation of Manchurian candidates. And I believe this bio was written by Ramola. I just want to give her credit. Is that correct, Chris?
Oh, I wrote that. She asked me for something, but...
Okay, you wrote it. Okay, just want to make sure that I give credit to who wrote it. Thank you, Chris. Hold on, my computer's decided to restart right now. Okay. So anyways, Chris, I'm glad that we had the opportunity to try this again. We did try to have the radio show on Whistleblower Nation, and we did not have success. It seemed like we were being impeded in every angle. So anyways, I'm glad you're here, and this is your crowd, so we can, speak very frankly, and we're speaking to TIs, and hopefully some non-TIs on YouTube will get to hear this as well. So just one of the things I'd like to do is, kind of start at the beginning, even like maybe how you got into IT work, a little bit about you personally so they can kind of understand who you are and your background.
Sure. Well, I'm 45 now. I was targeted when I was 33. And out of college, I grew up in Morrison, Colorado, just outside of Denver. I went to University of Colorado in Boulder and graduated with a finance degree. Out of college, I moved to Seattle and began working for a company called Aerotech, which is owned by a gentleman named Stephen Bisciotti. He owns the Baltimore Ravens football team. When I joined them, they were in a hyper-growth phase. So I learned everything about the, technical recruiting industry while I was at Aerotech. And then I was recruited out of Aerotech to a systems integration company called CompuCom, which was a lot like EDS. They were based in Dallas. They were a $2 billion company. Aerotech now is the largest staffing agency in the United States. They're called Allegis Group. So when I was with them, they were about a $300 million company. So I learned how they were growing their business, by creating these branch offices, which are just really staffing agencies. They're just owned by Aerotech. So after a year working at CompuCom, I was transferred to San Francisco by CompuCom to work in their Bay Area office. And I joined up with my first cousin. And he had just left medical school. He was teaching physics at Mills College. And I talked to him about the business model, and we said, let's start one on our own. So I recruited some people from Aerotech in Seattle to come down and join us, and together we built our own staffing agency in San Mateo that was, in about 4.5 years, grew to 11.5, almost 12 million in annual revenues. We had multiple opportunities to sell the company, but we decided to hold on to it. And then that's when the dot-com bubble burst, and then 9/11 happened. So our growth kind of flatlined, and I went back to California. I had left the company for a couple of years, started my art gallery in Denver, went back because the company wasn't doing well, and decided to start a second company, and that was called Watermill Consulting. My first one was called Dedicated On-Site Consulting, second one Watermill. And so I knew what I was doing, had a funding source to pay for people, to handle payroll. And I was really doing well. I had a lot of clients, and when I started Watermill, I immediately got a huge account with a company called Business Objects, and was doing their entire ERP implementation, their financial ERP implementation, and some other modules, and was having a lot of success. So DOC grew really quickly, but my new company was growing even faster, and it was a lot more lean. So I was doing ERP implementations for Business Objects and a company called Dassault Systems, which owns CATIA. So these are two very high-profile, brand name companies, and I was doing their ERP implementation, which are the types of projects that an Accenture, would do. So I was feeling really good. Things were going really well, and then I noticed, and just interrupt me, Ella, if you have any questions. I noticed while I was living in California, starting up Watermill, that my landlord was spying on my conversations. I noticed him outside of my door. And this was a friend of a friend whose mom had a house, in Half Moon Bay on the golf course. So I thought it was a nice place to live. And I moved in with a friend of a friend. So I felt comfortable there. But I noticed the landlord, spying on my phone calls. And I didn't think much of it, except that he, was being nosy. But all of a sudden he started acting strangely. And, I thought about the calls I was having, and I was talking to my business partner. This was a consulting company, a gentleman who owned a consulting company who was working directly with Business Objects as practically at the CIO level, senior director, VP level. They didn't have a CIO at the time, so he was pretty much the acting CIO. But he was a consultant. He was working through his own company, and I was working through my own company. So he and I had worked together before when he was at eBay, PayPal. My company helped do their integration, and so he and I were good friends. We would laugh a lot, and I thought, gosh, this guy's hearing our personal conversations, and maybe that's why.
Chris, I do have a quick question. Sorry to interrupt. You said he was acting strangely. What other indication did he give you that made you think he was acting oddly or strangely, other than the eavesdropping?
Yeah, well, he would start to kind of insinuate that I was doing something illegal. And
I see.
He, I think he was shocked that I just moved out there, needed to rent a room from him, and then all of a sudden had this second company with a bunch of clients and a bunch of business when, I was renting a room from him. He couldn't imagine how things could just happen so quickly for me. And this is a gentleman who had never worked in his life. He was 42 years old. His father was a patent attorney from Genentech who passed away, and his mother was a retired school teacher, but he had never worked. He had always lived off of, money his parents would give him. So, he didn't understand, how business really worked. And I think he thought that my friendship with Christopher was kind of fishy, but he didn't understand the difference between a corp-to-corp relationship and a full-time relationship. Christopher was not an employee of Business Objects. So in the sales world, you're entitled to, work with, to speak with your managers and laugh with them and take them to lunch and stuff. But in the consulting world, when you both have your own companies, you're allowed to work together. You're allowed to take trips together. So he and I had a business relationship that he had approved by the president of Business Objects. So we had our own consulting agreements and everything was fine. So he was just acting like, gosh, Chris, it seems like you're such a big shot, and I just, I didn't take offense to it. We were doing our own things, but, this is kind of what gang stalking and gaslighting is. This was the beginning of it. And at the time, I didn't understand what it was. So I just thought, why are you acting so strangely? One time he invited me into his room, and he was cleaning his shotgun. And he looked at me, and he said, this is for self-protection, if anyone, and I just wanted to kind of let you know that. And I said, why are you doing that? And so what was really suspicious is when his friends would come over, they would immediately, one time I was at the house, but had been dropped off by a friend and my car wasn't there. So I was in my room, but they didn't know it. He and his three friends came home and ran upstairs to his room talking about me. They said, oh, Chris is in here. Oh, cool. Let's go upstairs. And they went upstairs and they sat behind the TV set and were giggling like little girls. And so, again, I didn't know what was going on, but and then another time when I was there, his friends, when I mentioned, hey, what are you guys doing? They just kind of looked at each other and started giggling, and so it was something that stood out. And whenever I talked about my company, they kind of rolled their eyes, kind of like, yeah, sure, Chris, like we understand, about your company. So I couldn't figure it out. And then we actually got into an argument, and I moved out, and he invited me back to his house to apologize. He said, Chris, I just want to apologize to you. Can you, would you like to come back and play some pool? And I said, okay. I just wanted to make sure things were cool, and I wanted to make sure he wasn't going to do anything. So when I walked in that night, he was with a friend of his named Curtis, and I walked in, and he said, Chris, have a seat. I just want to let you know you're being recorded. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, Chris, tell me about your relationship with Christopher. Christopher was my client and the acting, VP at Business Objects. I said, why do you want to know? He said, it sounds, you have kind of tell me about your relationship. What were you guys laughing about so much? And I said, well, that's none of your business. And he said, well, tell me about Claudio. And he brought up the name of a gentleman named Claudio Silvestre, who was the former CIO of Compaq Computer and of Business Objects. And Christopher and I would talk a lot about him. He's kind of a flamboyant guy. And we would talk about Vegas stories and these kinds of things. And so this was personal information. And I just said, Michael, just know that I'm not doing anything illegal, okay? Christopher and I are not doing anything illegal. And it was, and Christopher and I had talked about a lot of different things and happening in Silicon Valley, and there's a lot of bribery and stuff like that in Silicon Valley. So we've had a couple conversations about other people at other companies and rumors about that kind of stuff. But I knew that, and I didn't want Michael just coming to some conclusion that I'm doing something illegal. All Michael needs to know is Christopher had been a client of mine for 6 years. I met him when he ran IT for Levi Strauss. He ran IT for Qualcomm, and he's a very well-known person. So, pat on my shoulder for having a relationship like that with him. So I knew, and so then what Michael said is, Chris, I just wanted to let you know that I have this whole place wired. I have it all wired for sound and wired for video. So I know everything that you've been talking about. And I just said, what are you talking about, Michael? It was the strangest situation of my life at the time, just being stuck in this room with this guy telling me everything I've been talking about has been recorded. And I said, Michael, just like I said before, just know I'm not doing anything illegal. But it dawned on me now what was going on, because he had been videotaping me and my conversations, and then his friends and Michael would go to his room and watch these videotapes behind the TV. And they thought they had this big conspiracy, because I would talk openly with Christopher. And at one point, Michael said, Chris, I have a video camera in the owl on the front porch of my house, and which is his mom's house, not his house. And I thought about it, and I said, well, I had a conversation with, I think I thought to myself, I had a conversation with Christopher about the two of us taking a trip to Mexico after this project. So I'm just thinking to myself, oh my God, Michael thinks that I'm paying this guy kickbacks or something. That's how I got this business, and he's giving me a hard time about it. So I just left. There were no kickbacks paid. We were independent companies, and we could do business together if we wanted to. I continued. I was doing well, so I went back to Denver. I left that night. I just left. I didn't want to start a fight or anything. I just left. So, but that always stuck in my mind, and so I went back to Denver, where I owned a loft right by Coors Field, and I just rented it out so I could go back to California and start this company. And
right.
So everything was going great. I had this client, 2 clients, had a bunch of contractors, high-level projects, and was doing wonderfully. And then, back at home in my loft, and then all of a sudden, one day, I started hearing this man and woman talking about me. And the man just said, so what do you think's going on with let me go back, because I put this in a certain sequence in my interview, so I want to stick to that. When I got back to Denver, everything was fine, and then I found out that my company was being investigated. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And investigated by whom? Investigated by who?
By Business Objects.
Okay.
Somebody had contacted a manager there anonymously, or I found out later that it wasn't, but at the time it wasn't anonymously. But at the time I was told about the investigation, I heard an anonymous tip was given to a manager about you and Christopher having an improper business relationship. And so I thought, oh my gosh, that must be Michael doing this. So Business Objects, these are these Silicon Valley corporations. SAP bought Business Objects. Business Objects is a leader in business intelligence software in the world. So this is a brand name client, and I was doing their financials implementation, their financials ERP implementation, part of it, but had all the lead developers. So it's a very important project. So they have to investigate these things, and I'm glad they did, because they go through your invoices, they go through their your time cards and their internal time card system, and they match up everything. They know your rates, they know how many hours your consultants worked and what you billed for those hours. So once they completed the investigation, which was handled by 2 different parts of the company, I was cleared and Christopher was cleared. So because everything was great, I had actually lower rates than any other firm there, and all of our projects were successful. So that was just unbelievable to me. I just thought, oh my gosh. And I later found out that one of my contractors had actually given someone that information, but I never found out who gave, if the contractor had spoken to Michael or if Michael was involved at all. I had no idea. I was never told about the details of this anonymous tip. But the contractor was fired. I kept the project, and Christopher, the manager there, his consulting company kept the project too. And in fact, they brought him on full time not long after that to run IT. So everything was great, and I had, we had went through this embarrassing, investigation, but I, came out of it, and then all of a sudden, one day, I'm sitting in my home office, and I hear this man telling me or saying to another or out loud, it looks like Chris was cleared from cleared by Business Objects in the investigation, and the woman said, yeah, I guess so. So what do you think is going to happen next? And they just continued, like two people having a conversation about me all day long. And I didn't know what was going on. I thought it was my downstairs neighbor, but I live in a newly constructed building in downtown Denver, cement floors, and there was no way I could hear someone from downstairs. You know, they'd have parties and I wouldn't hear anything. So how could I hear these people? And so that was the beginning of the Voice to Skull. And so what has taken me years to kind of figure out is how to describe all of what Voice to Skull is. Because a lot of TIs are going through the same thing and are finding it difficult to explain because you want to explain everything. You want to explain everything at once, and it gets jumbled together. Your brain can't handle it. So what I've, you know, and so what I think I can really help the TI community with is to help us kind of get on the same page when we talk about Voice to Skull. What is Voice to Skull? This, you know, we're all aware of what this program is, you know, and I'll give you a quick rundown so you know kind of what I'm thinking and how I describe this to people. But, you know, we know that the military is working on covert warfare. Everything's being transitioned to small teams of people, you know, Navy SEALs, all of these special forces teams that go in covertly and go and come back out. So with all of these teams require tactics, the development of new tactics that they can use. And we saw an instance of that in Cuba. You know, these are small teams using tactics. And if people don't understand how significant a new, newly developed set of tactics can be, you know, think about the disruption in technology that's happening. Think about all of these things that are happening around us that are disruptive, that have changed industries. And it's not just, tech. Things like fighting. I mean, think about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That disrupted fighting. It changed the way human beings fight and have fought for thousands of years. So when you think about what Special Forces does, you know, they develop tactics. And when we, you know, talk about, the American Psychological Association being connected to torture, you know, we have to understand that the APA is the largest employer of psychologists in America. And so when we talk about Mitchell and Jessen and what they were what they lost their case recently for about, you know, we have to look at just what the military and these intelligence services mean what they're doing when they're bringing in psychologists. They're developing tactics for harassment, tactics used by small teams to go in and harass. And so we have to kind of understand that. There's a quote, I think you guys have probably all heard it from these books that you might have read about psychological torture or this relationship between the APA and the military. But there's one gentleman, an APA member, and he let me say this again. He was an Army Surgeon General who was speaking to the National Convention of the APA's National Convention to defend the participation of psychologists in interrogation and in the military. And he said, psychology is an important weapon system. So when you're saying it's an important weapon system, you know that it's being developed, it's being used to develop these tactics. So that's what this game stalking tactics are. So, I'm speaking to the TI community, so I don't want to, take all of your time, doing this. But, everyone kind of knows that there are examples of this now. Cuba's the biggest one, but are examples of these covert military tactics that have kind of leaked out into the community. Just like the way weapon systems can leak out into the law enforcement community, so can covert stalking and harassment tactics that are used by covert teams. And so there are people like John Robb who have talked about coercive games. He's an Air Force pilot, Yale graduate, Black Ops mission commander, and he speaks openly about, America kind of transitioning, its intelligence agencies transitioning into this kind of private security model where private companies, use their own security services. And he talks about open source war and coercive games that actually talk about, providing monetary rewards, for gang stalking activities, tagging the target with paint, disabling the target's car, causing the target to lose money. All of these things can be rewarded with money. And he's talked openly about apps that can reward people for this kind of, targeted harassment, because that's how kind of the military works now, targeted harassment campaigns, covert operations. So that's the world we live in, and the electromagnetic weapons are just a part of that. But there are other examples. There's a German site called pay stalking. If you Google pay stalking, one word, you'll find a German site that talks about a group that pays monetary rewards for accomplishing certain stalking tasks and accumulating points. And, this is the kind of stuff that's on the dark web that is starting to make its way out on, into the public, internet. And certainly with Bitcoins and this stuff, we know what's going on. And then with Harvey Weinstein, that New Yorker article explains the relationship between powerful people and these private security companies. In that article, it says this company, Black Cube, would give Harvey Weinstein a dedicated team of expert intelligence officers that will operate in the U.S. and other necessary countries, a project manager, intelligence analyst, linguist, avatar operators specifically hired to create fake identities on social media, as well as operations experts with extensive experience in social engineering. That's a term that is brand new. Social engineering, people talking about expertise in social engineering, that's coming from the security industry. So these are these covert kind of tactics, military tactics that were created by the partnership between the military and psychologists to harass people and intimidate people. And they're now being incorporated into these services offered by, these private companies. And, these companies do things like claiming that, they'll talk to someone and say, well, a well-placed Western intelligence source, told us that this individual is up to no good. And, that makes it sound like this is an official person from the government, and it's not. That's an ex-spy. That's an ex-spy for hire. So when we talk about what happened to Rose McGowan, that article in the New Yorker finishes with a quote from her, and it says, she felt like she was being gaslighted, and everyone around her was, and she was living in a mirrored funhouse. So,
yes.
I think it's important to kind of wrap our heads around, what is actually going on here. And when we talk about who we are as TIs, the TIs fits the, certainly the narrative that directed energy weapons are being tested. It fits the narrative that there's this giant, Manhattan Project for the Mind, Brain Initiative project happening. It fits this John Robb and Black Cube private security narrative. It fits the covert operations, reaching into the suburbs where your neighbor now has these tactics, that took billions of dollars to develop, and he's using them against you to make you feel like you're crazy. And it fits the Cuban narrative. So what are we? We are, if everyone I'm sure is aware of the Soviet-era psycho prison, the Stalin put a lot of dissenters, a lot of people from his own, from his own military into these prisons, and just by calling them crazy. And that's what the TIs are. We're a pool of people. We're a mix of targets, of experimental guinea pigs, and folks with legitimate mental illnesses. And it's a pool of people into which anyone can be thrown if they're by one of these companies or individuals using these covert stalking tactics. All you have to do is follow the medical description for delusional disorder, which I'll read for you guys. And we're in the psycho prison. And what it does is, and once you're in the psycho prison, we are not to be believed. And anything we say is not to be believed. So it's a perfect cover for the testing of electromagnetic weapons, and more specifically, everything that these weapons do. These weapons, as we'll talk about in my story, they graduate. Voice to skull is not just voices in your head. It is a layering of different technologies, but especially remote neural monitoring technologies that can read your mind, take over your body, force you to speak, give you, lucid dreams, stimulate you sexually, cause all sorts of problems. And in addition, so there's verbal torture delivered through voice to skull, and there's these remote neural monitoring specific tortures that can interrupt your thoughts, can reflect thoughts back at you. It's just there's so many different tortures going on here. But what the pool of TIs does is it renders all of these characteristics or attributes of these electromagnetic weapons delusional. And the more we talk about them, which we have to do, the more those attributes, those symptoms, those experiences are thrown into the description of delusional disorder. And it's amazing because it's just I just pull my hair out every day looking at, when you break down what voice to skull victims are going through, how could anyone confuse this with a mental illness? And we can get into this, but, I did a little researching into some of these things. There's we talk about a forced speech, and if someone overhears you, or talking about forced speech, they think it's multiple personalities. But, if you listen to psychologists talk about multiple personalities, it's usually stemming from childhood trauma, and the personalities are distinct, and they're different from each other, and they don't even know what each other, are saying or doing. And that's not what forced speech is. Forced speech is you allowing someone to just talk through your mouth like you're on a conference call. So if I may, so we could kind of stick to the my story a little bit, but also kind of talk about how to really describe voice to skull. I can kind of go back to the beginning of voice to skull. And again, Ella, interrupt me if you have any questions at all. I'll just continue talking.
Well, you're going in a good direction, and you're sounding clear and very informative. So go ahead.
Oh, good. So, voice to skull is very. When it first happens to you, you think it's your neighbors. You think it's coming through the walls, but it's not. It's omnidirectional. So, when they start with this, they can issue threats to you that are very dangerous. What they did to me is they told me after the first week that they would kill me if I continued working in IT with my clients. So I had to immediately shut down my company. That's my career. And then what happened is they attacked me. I had a friend who came over, and he was working for me at the time, and I was, trying to tell him about the voices and these conversations, and the voices were just laying on, just pounding me with insults and things, and they were saying, "Ooh, Chris, we're spirits, we're in the walls," just kind of sarcastically, and I said, come on, you're not, freaking spirits, you jerk off. I was kind of speaking, talking back to him in a tough guy kind of way at the time. And I thought my friend could hear the voices. I said, "Can't you hear these guys? I know it's faint, but just try to listen very hard." And he couldn't hear them. So, I talked back to them and said, just shut up and stop talking to me. And my friend said, "Chris, I have to go, and I have to make a phone call." And he left and called the police, brought them back to my loft, and told them that I was talking to myself. And the police said, you can come with us voluntarily or we can hog tie you. And I wasn't screaming or yelling or anything. I was just talking out loud. So as soon as that happened, and as soon as they took me to that, for a checkup, at the hospital, my Achilles was cut. I couldn't talk about voice to skull anymore. And, they had just threatened my life if I had worked in IT, and I knew what they were doing. I knew they had set me up like this. So at that point, I just stayed silent about voice to skull for years. And in order to try to make money, I started these charity fundraising companies, which I'll talk about later. But what I want to kind of get into are these treatments. And so, voice to skull, if they just, threaten you all the time, it's something that is extremely dangerous. And like with me, they caused me to shut down my IT staffing company. A week after my friend took me to the hospital, my sister came over to suggest a psychiatrist. And she was with her dog. So she came to my house, and she was with her dog, and she was telling me, Chris, you should go see the psychiatrist. I said, no, Laurel, absolutely no way. These are human beings. These are human beings talking to me. And she said, Chris, just do it for me. And I said, Laurel, there's no way. I'll never go. And Voice to Skull cut in and said, Chris, if you don't see the psychiatrist, your sister's psychiatrist, we're going to kill her when she goes downstairs and gets in her car to leave, which is parked on parking level B2 with her dog, Bella. That's what they said to me. And that's exactly what happened. She was right in front of me with Bella, and she was parked on parking level B. I didn't even know it. So as soon as I heard that, I said, okay, Laurel, I'll go. My sister's name's Laurel. So that was it. I had to go see the psychiatrist. So those are two instances of me being tagged with a mental illness that occurred in 2 weeks, in a 1 week time span, that did it, cut my Achilles without, I wasn't able to understand what this program was about or describe the torture. There was just these voices. That's all I could say. And they do that, so that all of their testing, whatever they do to you, is always going to be considered delusional or bipolar or schizophrenic. And so that follows you around the rest of your life. So what I did is I stayed silent about Voice to Skull. I knew I had to abide by their death threat. So I stopped working in IT, and I just dealt with their torture every day while I started these online fundraising companies. My idea was if I could work with, some of Colorado's and other nonprofits around the world, I could kind of present who I am to the torturers that would, information at least that would have to go through the chain of command, would have to be communicated to the people in charge, because I didn't know if it was FBI or it was or Black Ops or intelligence or CIA or just a group, some band of terrorists, So, but that was my idea. I thought most likely it's government technology. So I did that for 7 years. I never talked about Voice to Skull. I never talked out loud to myself. I had everyone convinced that was just a one-time deal, and unfortunately, that never leaves people's minds. Once they hear a story about you, talking to yourself, as soon as you bring something up, they go back to that, and that's what happened later, many years down the road. So I'll continue with the story. These treatments for everyone, these are not quick statements. Now, certainly Voice to Skull can try to imitate a mental illness. But, a mental illness usually is kind of a running narrative. There are more complex, kind of stories. But when you read books about schizophrenia or delusional disorder, they kind of fall, into the same kind of zone. A lot of supernatural experiences. There's no way you can confuse Voice to Skull with something supernatural. If you do it, for a period of a few hours or a few days, you might be able to with voice transformation software, and probably longer than that. But when you're in Voice to Skull, they're talking to you constantly for years and years, and they end up making mistakes. And that's how you know they're human. So, one of the things they do is they build up treatments. And I've talked about this in other interviews, but I'll kind of go over it this what treatments are for you guys in case you haven't heard the interview. But they're very complex, and they pick up from where they left off the day before. It's not a bunch of thoughts all at once. It's not statements like "go kill yourself." They're things that are aimed at making you believe, designed to make you believe that that you have hope of being released from voice to skull, only to dash those hopes. They're always building up a belief in you that you're going to be released from voice to skull just to dash it. So these treatments, you don't think you're talking to aliens. You don't think you're talking to a deity. It's nothing like that. You are talking to people who are holding you hostage, and they just know that it's incredibly difficult to explain this to anybody. And if you've been, caught talking to yourself, it's impossible. It is literally impossible to explain. But if you understand, complexity of treatments, that'll help. So here's an example. The torturers might have kept you up all night the night before, explaining how your life was sacrificed for America's ambitions to develop electromagnetic weapons. They go on about you being in this program and their limitless budgets and how deep their ties are, and how significant you are, and they make you feel like shit. They really do. Pardon my language. But they use a lot of these kind of, Kubar torture techniques, which if you're not familiar with them, these are techniques used by the CIA that they were learned or, written about by authors who studied psychological torture in Russia and other countries. But again, this is an example of the military, creating, what over years and years and years of experiments, and information gathering, and interrogations and torture, what types of psychological torture techniques actually break somebody down. And this is like monopolization of attention, cultivation of anxiety, despair, alternating punishments and rewards, demonstrating omnipotence and omniscience, and then the use of scenarios, which is what these treatments are, denial of privacy, insults, threats, sensory disorientation, emotional love, emotional hate, fear revved up harsh, fear revved up mild, pride and ego up, pride and ego down, futility, establish your identity, repetition approach. There are a lot of these, and if you are interested in more information about these, I can send them to you. But when you think about what the torturers are doing to these to victims like me every day, they're using these techniques to just kind of, get information from you, make you think you're being released, only to pull it back, and to torture you. And when you find out later, they're torturers. This stuff is torture. How do they make you want to kill yourself? How? And we have to understand that most of us who've experienced any of this electromagnetic, torture, are most likely having our minds read. They're reading how we respond to the torture. How does it elicit thoughts? I think that's what they're trying to get to the root of. But if I go back to these treatments, they are building you up just to break you down again. So it's not a running narrative of your life, what's going on today. It's not you thinking a person sitting, at a restaurant is talking to you in your head. It's not a voice just saying, you're a jerk today or get your shit together. It's not like that. These are long conversations. So they can talk and talk forever. And so I'll continue with this one description. Just like a powerful person or drunk person can spout nonstop for hours at a time, the voice discullers can go on for hours about you or just about any topic. They trade off talking like prison guards, establishing their power and shooting the shit. But the next day, a voice disculler brings up something about you they like. You've been through countless treatments before, and they always end badly. So you take the compliment with a grain of salt, but your brain remembers it. And because you're binded to these conversations, you have to just sit there and listen. So one of them brings up this vague reference to this thing you did that put you into voice to skull, and you wonder what it is. You explain to them you've never heard a fly, and you have no criminal record, and retell elements of your life story that backs that up, but they continue talking, but now in a more placid tone. So now over the course of 12 hours, a couple days or so, they move from hatred to somewhat sympathetic, and then say, we've been maniacs, Chris. We've been doing this. We shouldn't be doing this to you. You don't deserve it. Another voice, the scholar, chimes in and says, it's hard doing this. I'm not even mad at Chris. So you notice this shift in their attitude, and you start thinking that maybe they're thinking more critically, about the program and their involvement in the program. And then now their kind of arrogance has declined, and they're speaking to you kind of like buddies and saying things like, this program is just a piece of shit, man. None of us wants to be here. So you loosen up and you say something funny, and they laugh with you, And so this kind of more reassuring tone continues. They talk about funny stories, brag about your baseball plays or baseball playing days in high school. And someone says, Chris, something big is happening, man. I just wanted to tell you about it. It's happening behind the scenes, and I think you're going to be saved. They're talking really positively about you. And so now you actually start feeling confident that the torture might end. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they say something like, Chris, we're going to help you get out of this. You know how we're going to do it? We're going to freaking bash your skull in with a sledgehammer and kill your freaking sister tonight, you stupid. So that's how treatments usually end. They're meticulously designed to build up hope in you over the course of days or weeks or months, only to destroy you traumatically. And so they started doing that all the time. And so when they started the Voice to Skull, they only did it to me in my loft and in my car for 3 years. And they used mirrored conversations, which means they just talked about me to themselves. So if you try to describe that to somebody, they just immediately default to mental illness. But if you listen to how I'm describing these treatments, then you have a better chance of kind of describing it. And not that that's going to help any of us, but at least all of us can kind of share this information. And so they did that. They voice to skulled me in my car and in my loft to make me think that my neighbors were doing it, that it was a local operation, and that there was a transmitter in my car or there was a transmitter in my loft. So I spent, 2 years, 2.5 years, looking for transmitters in my car. I had no idea. So later they started to bring in friends of mine into these treatments. First they were making me think my neighbors were involved, my downstairs neighbors, Phil and Dana, Chris, they're doing this to you. They're just not telling you. But once they kind of exhaust those tortures, once you just, you've been through so much of it and you talk to your neighbors and you're just like, it's not my neighbors, what are you talking about? What do? They bring in extra characters. They start bringing in your other friends. So here's an example of a treatment of where they brought in, this was a couple years later, when they brought in the governor. I lived downtown in Denver, and the mayor at the time, Hickenlooper, who's now the governor, lived a block away from me. I could throw a rock and hit his place. And so they were telling me, they built up this treatment to make me think that, friends and stuff were involved, and they signed on disclosures, and they can't talk about it, but we're all trying to get you out of it. In order to get you out of it, we have to find out who put you in, Chris, who put you in. And so I'll read off this treatment here that I wrote down, having to do with Hickenlooper. So one time they spent months building up the character of a woman. Let me get to that. Was another one. After another long-term treatment I experienced had it with John Hickenlooper, and the Voice of Scholars, this kind of played out on a week-to-week basis, this treatment. It wasn't the only thing they talked about. It was just layered in with about 8 other ongoing treatments, mostly having to do with the police or a number of my friends being involved. They're always maintaining these kind of stories. But they're always they always pick up from where they left off the day before. You could have forgotten about what they're saying. Chris, your lawyer friend is, doesn't want to talk, but we're still working on him. And there's something elaborate about my lawyer friend being involved, and I forgot about it. I'm doing something else, and they pick up the next day. Chris, your lawyer friend, we told you he spoke to your friend Jay yesterday. Well, we heard that Jay's not going to testify for you, and you're just like, oh my gosh, and they continue with it in the same, as if there's a soap opera, there's a script writer, adding pages to the script every day, and they're just improvising the dialogue. So, again, the Voice to Skull is this super secret government program, obviously, because of the technology that I'm trapped in, and many of my friends were supposedly brought in to help me, but they signed to these non-disclosure agreements, so they couldn't talk to me about it. And the Voice of Scholars didn't know how I was put into the program, but they wanted to help me. So they suspected John Hickenlooper might have put me in because one night I blasted my stereo with the windows open, which pissed him off. And so I'm told that someone from the program, Voice to Skull, asked John about his involvement, and he refused to answer any questions. So a couple of weeks later, Voice to Skull tells me that John, who was the mayor at the time, as I said, is being pressured to answer questions from the State Department about whether or not he put me into the program. The torturers continued talking nonstop and reminded me constantly about how serious my situation was, telling me, this is a program that put terrorists in, Chris. So every once in a while, they would interject something about the John situation. Weeks and weeks would go by, and they'd always bring up kind of, they'd be torturing me about something else, and then they'd bring up, well, John, we heard about John, we heard that John is still refusing to testify, Chris, so we'll keep you involved. You better figure out a way to make John testify. Of course, I wouldn't do anything. So this went on for months until one day they kind of acquiesced and said, they said John acquiesced and said a date had been set on which he would have to answer the State Department's questions. So they built up this whole thing. It's about John's refusing to answer their questions, but this is a super secret program that some of my friends might even be involved in, and they're all putting pressure on John to answer questions about Voice to Skull. Why did you put him into this Voice to Skull program? So they said that they had that John had agreed to this inquiry where he would answer questions from the State Department. So the day of the inquiry came, and they projected a picture of my mind of Hickenlooper sitting at a desk with a mic on a stage, kind of in an auditorium. He was sitting on one side of the stage, and the State Department officials were sitting behind a desk on the other side of the stage. And then they showed a few snapshots of the larger audience, which had a couple hundred people in it. And they showed other snapshots, not moving pictures, just snapshots of other people I knew, kind of sitting together. So I have a college friend who was in kind of an advisor to Ed Perlmutter. She was a lawyer, so they kind of built her up as being involved, and a few other friends, some lawyer friends. And so they had these kind of still pictures of them, real grainy, how these pictures are in your mind, kind of black and white, but all to kind of set up this inquiry that was taking place that day. So, I'm doing other things. I'm working on my charity businesses, and they would start the question and answer period, and they had someone mimicking Hickenlooper's voice, which sounded kind of like him, but whenever they'd ask him a question about, did you put Chris, how did you find out about voice skull technology, he would kind of dodge and weave the way Bill Clinton would, and I'm just, again, listening at home. I'd take a phone call, and I'd talk to somebody else, and then I'd hang up, and then they'd continue with the inquiry as if I just missed a question or two. They would just continue as if it was, it had been going on the whole time. So, almost like they're on a sound stage. So John never provided any concrete answers, and this treatment just continued going and going. And so, year after year, these treatments become longer and more complex because they're always trying to pull you into the point where you believe them, whether they're reading your mind or they're just, of course, we all know that Voice to Skull now is remote neuromonitoring. If you're hearing voices, they are reading your mind. But at the time, you don't know this. But they are always trying to build up these believable scenarios, no matter how long it takes. And once you believe it, then they pull it away from you traumatically to hurt you. And so, by the end of year one, they had convinced me that my neighbors were involved. By year two, they made me think my high school friends and their friends were involved. In year three, they made me believe some of these executive directors from the charities I worked with might be involved. In the fourth year, they said Hickenlooper was involved. The Denver police and the FBI had put me in the program. Fifth year, they said they created a story about a lonely and reclusive billionaire who was funding torture my torture because he wanted to give his money away to someone who had been through hell. And by year 6, they said my uncle and some people in my family were involved. And I have some interesting people in my family, and I'll talk about this later, but one of them was a woman named Youre and I'll talk about her now quickly so you guys know, but she was an international law school professor, a Swiss woman who was Palestine's legal advisor. She was a human rights lawyer, and she wrote an advisory opinion for the International Court of Justice that declared the separation wall in Israel illegal under international law. So you can Google her name and read about her, but she's a very important person. My business partner and first cousin in my staffing agency married her daughter. So these were people who I had not contacted yet because I was protecting them. I was very worried about them. So I was trying to kind of deal with this myself. And I have an uncle who's an aerospace engineer, and for some reason I was just kind of trying to handle this myself so I didn't have to bring them up. But after a few years, about 4 years, their names started coming up all the time because the torture was bringing them up in these treatments. Trying to say, Chris, we're talking to Vera now, and Vera's defending you, and they start bringing in names of people my cousin went to high school with, who he went to a private school in L.A. with some people who were well-known individuals and said they were involved. They want to find out what's going on with their cousin, or with their friend's cousin. So, by year 7, they said the U.S. Navy and Susan Rice were helping me because my uncle was in the military. In year 8, celebrities and heads of industry like Larry Ellison were being imitated. Trey Parker, who I went to college with, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, who went to elementary school with a friend of mine. They're always bringing in people who you have some kind of, distant connection to or something because you're liable to believe it. So this is what treatments do. They expand the spheres of influence in your life. They keep expanding them to include almost anybody. But it's never all of this stuff at once. It's never your brain thinking, oh, my gosh, all of these people are involved. No. It's not thinking your neighbors are involved unless you're being told your neighbors are involved. It's not thinking the guy across the street is involved unless they're telling you he's involved, And so they play tricks with us that way, and they're trying to mimic delusional disorder. It's very important to kind of understand what delusional disorder is and be aware of how you are kind of, and I'm not telling anyone how to talk about themselves, but be aware of how this program is trying to mimic the symptoms of delusional disorder. So if you don't mind, I'll read a couple paragraphs from this book about delusional disorder. And that's why it's so hard for us to describe this, because this TI pool is, these tactics that they're using are designed by psychologists. So when we talk about these military tactics, how do you make someone sound crazy? How do you throw them into the pool of TIs? You do things to them that elicit these sorts of comments when they talk to somebody about their targeting. Delusions are simply false ideas believed by the patient but not by other people in his or her culture that cannot be corrected by reason. They are usually based on some kind of sensory experience that the person misinterprets. This may be as simple as brief static on the radio or a flicker of the television screen that the person interprets as a signal. Family members often wonder where the delusional ideas in the affected person came from. One simple form of a delusion is the conviction that random events going on around the person all relate in a direct way to him or her. If you are walking down the street and a man on the opposite sidewalk coughs, you don't think anything of it and may not even consciously hear the cough. The person with schizophrenia, however, or delusional disorder not only hears the cough but may immediately decide that it must be a signal of some kind, perhaps directed at someone else down the street to warn him of that person is coming. The schizophrenia sufferer knows that this is true with a certainty that few people experience. If you are walking with such a person and try to reason with him or her past these delusions, your efforts are probably futile. Even if you cross the street and the presence in the presence of the same person, question the man about his cough, the individual will probably just decide that you are part of the plot. Reasoning with people about their delusions is like trying to bail out the ocean with a bucket. If shortly after the cough incident a helicopter flies overhead, the delusion may enlarge. Obviously, the helicopter is watching the person, which further confirms the suspicions about the cough. And if in addition to these happenings, the person arrives at a bus stop just too late to catch the bus, the delusional system is confirmed yet again. Obviously, the person who coughed or the helicopter pilot called the bus driver and told him to leave. It all fits together into a logical, coherent whole. So, normal persons would experience these events and simply curse their bad luck at missing the bus. A person with schizophrenia, however, has experienced different things, so the events take on a different meaning. So while the person responds, I'll just continue reading this. The cough and the helicopter noise may be very loud to him or her, and even the sound of the bus may be perceived to be strange. While this normal person responds correctly to these as separate and unrelated events, similar to the stimuli and events of everyday life, the person with schizophrenia puts them together in a pattern. So thus, both over-acuteness of the senses and an impaired ability to logically interpret incoming stimuli and thoughts may lie behind many of the delusions experienced by affected minds. So to them, the person who cannot put these special events together must be crazy, not the other way around. There are many excellent examples of delusional thinking in literature. So it talks about Chekhov, a policeman walking slowly past the windows. That was not for nothing. Here were two men standing still and silent near the house. Why? Why were they silent? And agonizing days and nights followed by Ivan Dmitrich. Everyone who passed by the windows who came into the yard seemed to spy on him or was a detective. The delusions become more complex and integrated, maybe than simply watched. The person becomes convinced that he is being controlled by the other people, manipulated, or even hypnotized. So that's what we're up against, these sorts of descriptions. Delusions may be types other than paranoid, grandiose delusions, quite common. I felt that I had the power to determine the weather, which responded to my inner moods, and even to control the movement of the sun in relation to other astronomical bodies. That's a quote from a person, from a patient. So this can lead to the belief in the person that he or she is Jesus Christ, the Virgin Mary, the President, or some other exalted or important person. So people believe they can fly, stop bullets with their chest. So a relatively common delusion is that the person can control other people's minds. One young woman I saw had spent 5 years at a home because each time she went into the street, she believed her mind compelled other people to turn and look at her. She described the effect on her mind as like a magnet. They have no choice but to turn and look. Another patient believed he could change people's moods by telepathic force. I eventually felt I could go into a crowded restaurant, and while just sitting there quietly, I could change everyone's mood to happiness and laughter. Another variant in the delusional belief is that one's thoughts are radiating out of one's head are being broadcast over radio or television. This is called thought broadcasting and is considered to be almost a certain indication of schizophrenia. So, thought broadcasting, I think we've all heard that before. People hear that, and it's a certain indication of schizophrenia. One woman described thought broadcasting as, I believe, or another woman described her delusions as, I believed I had a ticker tape going on in one ear and coming out the other with all my thoughts written on it. And a young man recalled, I was really upset the other night because the people on the news were saying what my thoughts were. I know this to be true because they sent me messages on what they would be doing. I hate it when they tell my thoughts to everyone who is watching. I also hate it when people can hear my thoughts and know everything about me. So, the hallmark of delusional disorder is something that the delusion is untrue but not unreasonable. So that's what we're faced with. We have to understand that when we talk about these things, when they're setting us up with helicopters, when they're setting us up with people driving up and down the street, they are setting us up for a delusional disorder and for people who and look, I don't have any answers to this in terms of how the TI community communicates. What I'd like to do is try to describe my experience versus what these delusions are. Thought broadcasting is the belief that other people are reading your mind. Other people are reading your mind. That the news anchors are reading your mind, and who knows with these experiments? There could be, individual experiments when some of this is happening. But when I'm describing these treatments, I'm describing long situations of, made up of conversation where a built-up-in belief is taking place. Believing that something ties into what you were just thinking about is kind of a thought of, a stream of consciousness sort of thing. I think a lot of these mental illnesses kind of are based on kind of stream of conscious stuff that's going on in your head already that is just being kind of, that you think other people are aware of, that an inner voice responds back to you, by issuing a statement or something. But what I'm describing are soap operas. Stephen King couldn't write he could write them, but when each day is kind of a new 10 pages added to the novel, that's what I'm describing. That's what voice to skull treatments are. When they build up this thing that Hickenlooper's involved, and then put on this skit, with his voice, and they did this a lot to me. I'll kind of. Should I keep going, Ella? Do you have any questions?
No, I don't really have any questions yet. I'm just kind of letting you go, follow your stream of thought. I don't want to interrupt your thought process, but yeah, so far it's very interesting.
Okay, good. So this happened for the first 3 years just in my Lawson car. Then they started doing it at my friends' houses, so it coincided with these treatments that maybe my friend Jason Cross was involved because I could hear the voice of skull at his house. Same thing with another friend. And then and at this time I had started these 3 charity fundraising companies to kind of build up my credibility, They were online companies that raised money for, it was an online pet store that raised money for pet-related charities and schools and other nonprofits. These companies, these 501c3s and schools could have their own online pet store. So, I kept working on that every day and building relationships with these charities. American Humane, I'd get a picture with the, people at American Humane. I'd post it thinking that the voice of scholars, I'm working with American Humane, why are you torturing me? This has to get, it has to be communicated up the chain of command. But they just, kept torturing me. And so I was kind of recruited into a second company that was an online, it was an education expo for disadvantaged kids underprivileged kids, and in Denver. And so that was another 6 months, or that was 8 months I worked on that. Then I started another online fundraising company, like a daily deal site for the Colorado Veterinary Medical Association, a 50-50 partnership with the CVMA, which is a very well-known organization. The CSU, Colorado State Veterinary School, School of Veterinary Medicine, is the number 2 school in the country. So Temple Grandin is a professor there, and she's part of the CVMA. They're kind of sister organizations, the school and the CVMA. So it was a big deal to be a 50-50 partner with them and go public with this fundraising site. So, I was very credible. I had business meetings every day, but this torture was going on constantly. So this went on until the recession hit, and I had put all my money into this. I lost everything. My loft went into foreclosure. I tried to get back into IT at the last minute to save my loft. I just said, screw it. I don't care about the death threats. I had an opportunity to work with Yahoo. I was working with Yahoo on a big deployment project, but then the CEO, Carol Bartz, was fired right before my company and another company were supposed to do this desktop deployment for their entire company, a global, Win7 deployment. It was amazing. The day after I had the statement of work signed, she got fired. And my company had done Carol Bartz's other desktop deployment, when she was at Autodesk. So I lost my loft, and that's when Voice to Skull started doing they started introducing these remote neuromonitoring technologies. They were talking to me directly at the time, still building up these treatments, and, threatening me. But it's not just blah, blah, blah. It's always built up, So one day, they created a treatment called the vetting sessions. I call it the vetting sessions. And it was another one of these kinds of setups where, you're in voice to skull, and, it's a secret society now, and there are people inside who are very concerned because they brought in a relative, member of Vera Gallon-Debus's extended family. And, Vera, again, very well-known in international law circles international lawyer. And so they said, Chris, we can't talk about this openly because you understand this is a covert technology, it's classified. But Vera's involved, and we have some other people involved too. And so, again, they know who I'm related to. And so they brought in Melissa Gilbert. Melissa Gilbert went to elementary school with my first cousin and business partner, just random. He went to a school called Buckley Academy. And so that's where she went. And they weren't friends in high school. I mean, and this is a private school, elementary through high school. They weren't friends. They knew each other, but they weren't like close friends or something. But they brought her in, because she's an important person. She said, she heard that your cousin, that her schoolmate, your cousin, was related to you. So she wanted to get involved. So they said, Chris, we're going to go through your life story again, and try to explain everything the way you have to us over the years. And so they'd ask me these questions again. Chris, tell me about the experience when you rolled your car in high school. I got in an accident in high school and rolled my car. Tell me the experience when you did, you broke your ankle. Tell me the experience when you jumped over the fence, after some party, or tell me the experience with your mom when this happened. And I've lived a very normal kind of life, no record, but, high school stories, that kind of stuff. Because they were kind of building it up as if, we don't know if to trust you. We don't know if you're, you have the honor, that Voice to Skull needs. They're making you think that you're almost going to be accepted into their organization. So they built up this treatment. Melissa Gilbert was involved. They didn't imitate her very well, but they would say that, Melissa's here. She wants to ask some more questions. They did this for 2 weeks straight. And then this is when they introduced emotion injections of emotion. And how they did that was they were talking about me, and one of the Voice to Scholars would kind of back me up. Said, Chris has answered that question before. Chris has answered that question 100 times before. He's a good person. He didn't, steal, from anyone. You're trying to say he's. They're going back to a high school story. They were asking me where my car stereo came from. Chris didn't steal the car stereo. He told you that 100 times. And when he said that, this character, I call him hoarse voice because he kind of speaks with a hoarse voice. He was getting angry. Don't talk about Chris like that. Don't. We already told you that he's not. That he's not a criminal. And when he said that, I realized my lips started moving and my fists were clenched. I looked down and my fists were clenched. I could not believe his emotions were like coming through me. And so, in this treatment, the vetting treatment, they brought up a test I took in high school that I admitted cheating on. And I always said, and I was still talking back to them with my own voice at this point. For all of these years, this was 2005 to 2010, I was talking back to them out loud. I lived alone most of the time and would just speak out loud. So they were asking me about this test. Chris, we know you mentioned this test, and we suspect you cheated on it, but you don't want to answer these questions. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. I would answer them if you read my Miranda rights to me, but I won't answer them to you like this. So they said, okay, Chris, we understand. So, but you're saying that you did not cheat on this test. I'm saying I'm willing to tell the truth about what happened. So this was a test I had cheated on in high school, and they knew it, and I kind of made sure they knew it, but I didn't want to answer the questions. I was kind of standing up for myself, standing up for my rights and my civil rights. And so I started thinking about the test, and in my mind, I imagined this, sitting in my seat and looking at this other guy's answer sheet. And as soon as I did that, they were bringing up this test, talking about it. I envisioned it, and the voice of color said, "That's it, we got him. We got him." And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, they're reading my mind. I thought I had just been talking to them with my, with just as a regular person speaking out loud. They could hear me somehow, through a bug or something. But that's when they started reading my mind. So during this 2-week vetting session, it went on, and they started giving me a hard time about a Greek friend of mine. And they were saying that he was involved in Voice to Skull. He put you into this. This is a friend of mine. He was a DJ in Denver, and just a nice guy who was one of my friends, and we weren't close friends, but he was calling me, around this time to go out once in a while. So they said, this guy Kostas, he's, we hear that he's in the mafia. Chris, did you know that? Part of the vetting sessions, part of the trial. No, I've never heard of that. I've never heard of him being involved in the mafia. And they said, well, Chris, we have a good source that's telling us that he is the one who put you into Voice to Skull. And then the Melissa Gilbert character said, we do not, we want to know everything you know about Kostas putting Chris into Voice to Skull. If you have any information about that, you let us know. And this went on for about 4 hours when they were berating Kostas about being involved. And I'm half Italian, so they were kind of building it up as, Chris, are you aware? Do you participate in the Italian community in Denver? And do you participate? What do they think about the Greek community? I'm like, everybody gets along in Denver. There's nothing like that. And there's an Italian festival I might, would go to once a year in Denver. That's about the extent of it. And but they talked about this Kostas guy for 4 hours. And then 2 days later, I'm on Facebook, and I read that Kostas's mother-in-law, who I had just met a couple weeks before, died of an aneurysm. And they had never talked about Kostas like this before. They had never brought up anything about him having to do with, putting me in Voice to Skull, any connection like that. And as soon as I heard that, I just thought, oh, my God, what is going on? And that's when I decided to pack up and move and write as much as I could about my experiences. This was 2013 when this happened. This was the vetting session. I lived for 2 years at this friend's house after losing my loft in 2010. So I moved to Cambodia and bought all the books I could about bullying and torture, and read as much as I could about the United States involvement in torture, what this program was about. I read, what I could about Voice to Skull online, but I'm so upset that I didn't get involved with the community, that I didn't get involved with the forums. I just, I was trying to kind of understand how, I might be involved in this project that is, might involve, my family members, lawyers, and they just had me convinced that maybe, there was a purpose, there was a reason for me, being involved in this project, in this program. So I started writing about this story. I started reading, just voraciously, and lived for a year in Cambodia, 6 months in Cambodia, 6 months in Vietnam. And at the end of my stay in Cambodia, I went public on Facebook about my experiences. And I wrote, a 2-page letter on Facebook and posted it and said I had been gang stalked, and they threatened, or they mentioned Kostas's name over and over, and then that was 2 days before his mother-in-law died. And I'm just making sure everybody knows about this. And people wrote back. They just said, Chris, are you out of your mind? Are you smoking something? What are you doing in Cambodia? Come back. They had no idea that my life had just been, one thing and then just, drilled, just pounded away on until I had lost everything. And I had no choice but to go public about this. And so my sister thought, oh, well, it's connected to him talking to himself. So she told all of my friends that, it must be connected to Chris's, bipolar, problem or, illness. And because that's what the psychiatrist thought it was, even though I didn't tell her I was talking to myself, to the voices. I thought it was a neighbor. I told her, I think it's my neighbor's talking to me. So anyway, I had that on my record. So everyone connected my claims of being assaulted with these electromagnetic weapons and the death of my friend's mother-in-law to delusional, or to bipolar at that time. So, I was doing fine out there. I had a lot of energy and was, kind of happy about living there. I had a girlfriend, and then my dad contacted me and said, Chris, we'd like you to come back because your mom and I are worried about you. And I said, okay, I'll come back, but, I don't want to talk to any psychologists or psychiatrists. And they said, well, Chris, we'd like you to speak to somebody. And I said, well, Dad, if you can come up, if we can come up with an objective test for schizophrenia, then I would love to speak to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So I did some research about and found this eye test that is online. You guys can search for it, and it's an eye movement test. And that schizophrenics might kind of have a hard time following a line on a computer screen. So if something's tracking your eye movement, it can tell that you're having a hard time, following it. And so I gave him information about it, and my dad wrote me back and said, Chris, I found a place in Denver that'll give you the eye test. So he flew me back, and on the plane back, Voice to Skull said, Chris thinks he's coming back to Vietnam. And I didn't know what it meant. And so I got to Denver, and I went to the hospital, this facility, private, hospital. And I walked in with my dad, and I was feeling really confident. I was writing about this stuff. I had it off my chest, I was like, bring it on, everybody. I'm talking about this openly. And so the administrator kind of brought me back through these doors that were kind of held open, by doorstops, and put me, sat me and my dad down in this kind of waiting room. And then she came back and said, Bill, can you come with us? We just have a couple pieces of paperwork for you to fill out. And so my dad got up and left, and I sat there for about 5 minutes by myself. And then these four people with, with what do you call them, the outfits on, and rubber gloves, walked in and said, Chris, you're staying with us here. And I just thought, oh my God. And I walked out into the hallway, and they had closed the two big doors, and I was stuck in this place. And so I didn't know what was going on, how long they'd keep me. I didn't know what they were doing. But my Facebook post motivated my parents to petition to have me, adjudicated or, confirmed, as a danger to myself or others, basically. So that was really frustrating. It took 3 days for them to finally talk to me. I told them, look, I'm just an activist. I shared a story that happened about, me being victimized by these weapons. The first thing the guy said to me is, Chris, if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, and acts like a duck, then it's most likely a duck, isn't it? Talking about schizophrenia. And so I just said, no, I'm not. But whenever they asked me if I'm hearing something, I would say no. And they put me on medication, on Haldol pills. But the Voice to Scholars would talk to me every time I went outside to hang out in the courtyard, to smoke a cigarette. Everyone ends up smoking, in those places. So, met a lot of people there, and everyone was so nice to me. But I didn't know how long I was going to be trapped. It turns out they kept me for 13 days. And I said, look, I'm not hearing voices. I'm not a threat to myself and others. And so they had to let me go. So I came back to Vietnam, and my girlfriend and I broke up. She got a job in Japan, and I moved back to Denver, or to California, and I got a job with a startup company in the Bay Area as a corporate recruiter. And that's when, I'm so sorry for taking so long to get to this, but, that's the story, up to this point. And so this is when they started hitting me with all of these other technologies. They were torturing me nonstop at my work and keeping me up at night. And that's when they introduced forced speech. One day, I was in my room, in this room I was renting in the Bay Area, and we were talking to voice to skull, and all of a sudden someone said, "Hey, Chris, this is Joe," and it was coming out of me. And, I had been through so much that it wasn't really shocking. I think people who experience voice, forced speech aren't really shocked by it, but it is scary when it first happens. And so now I'm talking to them through this person who's speaking through me. And they continued with this. They tortured me so hard at my work that I actually ended up having to leave my company. I got a settlement from my company. It's a whole other story I'm not allowed to talk about because I got a settlement. But let's just say I was warned by somebody there that something was going to happen to me. This beautiful woman, soul, that worked there. She was a human rights attorney from China who left the country because she was persecuted, and she started working in this company. And so she brought me outside and said, "Chris, be careful. I just want to warn you. Just be careful. There's some talk. There's some people. I talked to the CIO or the CFO and some other people, and there's some talk about you. So just watch your back." And I got fired a week after that. So I probably shouldn't say that out loud, but I don't care. I was worried about my safety. That's why I'm kind of saying that. I was worried about my physical safety. So I left the company, and that's when the torture really ramped up. And they were now speaking through my own voice and through voice to skull. And now they were starting to show me biorobotization. And one day I was driving in East Palo Alto where I live, and they told me to pull over my car. And I pulled over my car, and they said, "Chris, we're going to test some waves out on you." And so I didn't know what they meant. I pulled over and stopped, turned off the gas, or turned off the engine, and they said, "Here's okay, Chris, we're going to do some experiments on you. Here's the first wave." And all of a sudden, my left hand started shaking back and forth, going back and forth, like if you held your arm straight out and your palm, kind of parallel to the ground, my hand was going back and forth at the wrist, just over and over and over, but in perfect, kind of mathematically perfect intervals, like a metronome, but very fast, faster than I could do it naturally, and with more control. It was just this computerized like pulse, and that's what I thought was happening. They have these waves, these pulses now that they're experimenting on me. So they did that for 5 minutes, and then they stopped it, and they said, "Chris, now we're going to test another wave on you." And now my entire left arm from the elbow to the tips of my fingers started hitting me in the chest. My thumb would whack me in the chest over and over and over and over for 5 minutes. And then that stopped. And then they said, "Chris, here's a wave that your cousin Joe's working on." They were trying to convince me that my cousin Joe was involved. And it's called the gas pedal wave. And all of a sudden, my right foot started extending down to the floor where the gas pedal was and back up, kind of at the ankle, extending and flexing at the ankle. And they did that about 30 times, going down, back up, going down, going back up, while they're talking to me through my own mouth. And so I'm like, oh my gosh. So then they said, "Chris, now here's the final wave to kind of, and we're going to finish you off with this." I think they said something like, "We're going to finish you off." And all of a sudden, my upper body, my entire torso started going back and forth, forward and backward in my seat, where to the extent that my chest was hitting the steering wheel, and then my back would be thrown back into the back of the seat. So back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Just almost that far. Front and I kind of touched the steering wheel, and then other times I wouldn't quite touch it, but that's, it was that much movement. And they did that to me for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. I couldn't stop it. And I was crying. I had tears coming down my face, and I didn't know what was going on. I thought they were finishing me off, and I literally picked up a cigarette, because I started smoking at this point, and lit it and was being thrust back and forth while smoking a cigarette. And I was just holding my hand out, still going back and forth, and I just thought, that's it. If I'm dead, I'm dead. So that was just torture. Now, they stopped that, and then they continued with the treatments, and now they would they were talking to me through my mouth. So I was out of work, but I lived in East Palo Alto, a few blocks from this kind of carniceria that was it's near the IKEA on University Avenue and 101 in Palo Alto. So I would walk to this carniceria. There was a Starbucks there, and I talked to Voice to Skull all day long, which was talking back, through my mouth. So I put my earpiece in, and it would just look like I was talking on the phone. But if anyone ever heard me, it was me having a conversation with the Voice to Skull. And so I would do that, and that was my routine for days and days and days. I mean, weeks, probably 3 weeks or something. I was doing that, and they would keep talking to me, and I'm thinking, gosh, this must be, you're going somewhere with it, and they keep telling me you're in Silicon Valley, and we just want to show you some things about the technology. So I'll kind of tell this story, but imagine it taking place over the course of like 3 weeks. That's how I should really explain it. So Starbucks for the first few days, talking to them. Then they told me to take a walk down University towards Palo Alto, Chris, and we'll talk to you as you go. So I start walking, and they walked me through a neighborhood, and they said, see that house on the left, the blue house? That's Mark Zuckerberg's house. He bought that for a high school friend of his who worked at Facebook. And see these 3 houses? These are also Facebook houses. And so they'd walk me around the neighborhood, point out these houses, and then at night they say, head over to Palo Alto because we want to show you something. And as I was walking down the street this time, the street lamps on University were going off one by one, turning off as I would walk by them. So they did that for 4 street lamps went off. And I just thought, oh my gosh, what's going on? And so I was, this night, this is, let's say a week into it, I was at this kebab place in Palo Alto, sitting outside about 8 o'clock at night, having dinner. And they said, pick up that fork with your right hand. So I picked up the fork, and they said, President Obama is here, Chris. President Obama is here, and he wants to show you something. And I just thought, okay. And so I picked up the fork, and all of a sudden, in my right hand, someone starts spinning the fork using my right hand. My right hand, I'm spinning a pen. That's why that sound came. But I was sitting there. No one was sitting. It was at the restaurant. I was alone. It was a small restaurant, and I'm spinning this fork, and I'm left-handed, and so I can barely spin anything in my left hand. But here they were spinning this fork in my fingers. The way you would kind of spin a pen or something in your fingers, going from one finger to the other, doing that very quickly, very well. And I'm just looking at it going, oh, my gosh, I can't believe it. I can't believe you guys can do this. But that's what they do. They reveal the technology in graduated stages. So you think that you know everything about it, but you don't. And at this point, I'm still talking back to them out loud. I hadn't even, they hadn't even introduced the hive mind telepathy yet. But now I'm thinking, oh, my gosh, it can control my fingers? Oh, my goodness. So, they continued with the torture treatments. A lot of them would take place in my room in Palo Alto, East Palo Alto. And they would start to tell me that, or they began, probably a month earlier, they had introduced a ex-coworker of mine who I had done some business with. She worked for CompuCom Systems. And they told me, Chris, this person really cares about you, and we brought her in because we care about you too, Chris, and we don't want you to have to go through this by yourself. And she agreed to participate, and so she's monitoring this with your uncle. They told me that like a month earlier, and so anytime they would maintain that believability in me, somewhat 80% believe, or maybe, I don't know, 60% believability I'll give them, by saying that, she's laughing. Anytime I would kind of say something sarcastic back to them or crack a joke or something, they'd say, Chris, you have your friend laughing. She's laughing hysterically. And so I didn't really believe it, but when I was in East Palo Alto, after, the fork incident, they started using, the voice transformation software very well. And they started using her voice. And they were building up this kind of big reveal of the technology. And that's when they introduced the hive mind telepathy and the sexual stimulation and all of that stuff. So they would say one of them would put on a glove and, here's your friend, from this company I used to work for, my ex-colleague, and she wants to take care of you tonight. So we're going to leave you guys alone on Voice to Skull, and she can take care of you. And so then she would get on, hi, Chris, and they wouldn't let her talk too much because they'd give away her personality. But it was her voice. And she'd say, okay, now just, sit back and relax. I'm putting my glove on. And then all of a sudden, my hand's taken over. And they move my hand wherever they want to. And so they were doing that, every night for about 2 weeks during this treatment. And then they started telling me that some of these celebrities were involved. They said, oh my gosh, Barack Obama's voice came on and said, Chris, you're part of something special here. You're part of Voice to Skull. And, we just are trying to tell you how much we love you. And so this went on, and they would tell me, well, Voice to Skull, Chris, it's for the military, but celebrities use it too. All the celebrities might have stalkers, and wouldn't it be nice to be able to freeze a stalker in their place? You're in an exclusive club, Chris. All you have to do is say, a code word and describe the person you want stunned, and Voice to Skull will stun that person for you. So they were trying to make me believe that I was kind of being brought into this, this group of, of celebrities who were granted access to Voice to Skull. They said my uncle had been brought in, my cousin had been brought in, and, it's this amazing technology that only a few people have access to, and that everyone who's given access like this has a kind of a controller, who watches them on the satellite. And if you need anything from the controller, you just ask them. And so at this point, they told me about the telepathy. Chris, just think now. All you have to do is think your thoughts. And I think my thoughts, and then they'd respond to it. So they started revealing the hive mind technology. They started putting on skits. They pretended that Kristen Wiig and Phil Armisen from Saturday Night Live were involved. And they had this rhyme, like, Chris has been Voice to Skull. He has been so tortured, probably the most tortured person in the world. How long has he been tortured? 7 years, nonstop torture. I think at the time it was 10 years, nonstop torture. And they had this. So Chris goes back to Voice to Skull, or Chris. They were telling my life story in this one kind of skit they were doing. That was kind of like a Kristen Wiig, Phil Armisen, Saturday Night Live performance. And they were retelling my whole story, So Chris had to sell his loft and lost his cat. Oh, poor Cato. What happened to Cato? And so, they were telling my life story and this kind of thing, and then they broke out into song with lines about Voice to Skull. This is what Voice to Skull is. Technology you can't not, resist. Or, I'm doing a bad job remembering it. I wish I had written it down. But it had music, and it was like a Broadway show. It was done so well as any Saturday Night Live sketch, And so that had me believing that, they have some pretty, let's just say, capable, impressive kind of people working for them to do these imitations so well. But I didn't really believe what was happening. But, they continued with this for 2 weeks, and then they built this up that all of they'd revealed the hive mind telepathy. They had shown me what hive minding looked like if Facebook had the technology, different chat rooms. Some you could go in and do the masturbation thing with another person, but it's not really cheating because you're doing it to yourself. So that's why a lot of celebrities do it, and Silicon Valley types. They pretended Marissa Mayer was there. They pretended Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk was there. And so you have these different chat rooms. This is a chat room that's kind of sensual. Everyone who's in this chat room, speaks kind of like this. They're really interested in kind of like the way you might talk if you're being in an S&M session or something. And here's another chat room, and this one they speak really quickly. And this one's more about sharing business, and people are talking quickly, and so they're giving me an impression of kind of what different chat rooms might be like. And with Voice to Skull, this group had created their own kind of lingo. If something was funny, if someone said something that was funny, they would continue using that line. So instead of saying small, they would use itsy bitsy teeny weeny yellow polka dot bikini. So anytime someone would talk, and minuscule or small, or if that word needed to be used, came up in conversation, they would say itsy bitsy teeny weeny yellow polka dot bikini, and you have to wait for them to say the whole thing. And so they would continue with this, myself and others. Trey Parker was imitated so well. They had his personality down perfectly. And these are improvised conversations over the course of hours, and the stuff he was saying was just hilarious. So I was kind of beginning to think that, gosh, maybe they're right. Maybe there is something like this going on. And, and so they built up the believability in me over the course of 2 weeks. And then finally they said, Chris, now we have to tell you, this is Obama speaking, why you're really here. And you're not going to like it, Chris. And they had already done the hive mind. And, let me just say something quickly about the hive mind. You could freestyle something with hive mind, with this group. So they would just continue. They could talk and amongst themselves and repeat or rhyme the last word of their sentence with the word that was used before, with whatever the rhyme, the ongoing rhyming word was. So they could speak for an hour, and with every sentence, maybe not an hour, but for 10, 15 minutes amongst themselves, always rhyming with the last word, and because you can sense what they're saying. It's kind of like a layering effect. Imagine hearing a voice, but maybe 2 or 3 voices, where one, and you're coming up to a word. Chris went to the park, and at the park he saw and you're hearing maybe 3 words layered together, with one coming through a little bit, more clear than the other. And that's what the hive mind is. So somehow with the group participating, if 2 of them are thinking, Chris went to the park and saw a dog, that word I think is weighted more than the others because 2 people were thinking of it at the same time. So it comes through a little bit more clearly. But they only do it with, 2 or 3 people because it gets clouded. So I don't know how the technology works, but it's not that, it's incredible. But at the time when they were showing this to me, it was just kind of layered, just kind of layered with one coming through more than the other. But there was always a word. If you're talking and you wanted to come up with a word that rhymed with boot, Chris went on a hike and put on his boots, and then he came home and was in cahoots, and but theirs were better than those. But they would always come up with another word, and if the person was kind of stuck, the hive would give it to them. So anyway, all of that was described for me. Then they said, so Chris, we have the bad news for you. You were chipped in your loft back in 2005, and the chip has a battery on it. And the battery, unfortunately, in order for this to work, it was implanted deep into your brain stem. And Chris, you've been a non-consensual, victim, but you're doing it for the United States of America, and the United States of America loves you for it. And we just want to tell you that everyone's here, your family's here, all of these, celebrities and friends who consider you one of their friends, Chris, consider you one of their best friends. They did it better than that. They made it, sound like, we all came together to to say thank you for doing this for your country, Chris. And I'm just thinking, what is going on? And they said, Chris, the battery on your chip that's in your brain has a 10-year lifespan, and it's just about to run out. And they hit me with what I call a P wave. It's a pressure wave, and it makes you think your entire body is underwater like 1,000 feet. That's the kind of pressure it makes you feel is happening. They can do it to your head. They can do it to your entire body. And so they were using this P wave. And, this P wave can be increased from like a 1 to a 10. So they started at a 1, and I felt this thing in my chest, this pressure. And then they continued going. And they're talking to me, Chris, so we're just letting you know that, you are a true American. Everybody loves you. We're going to let this battery run out. We've timed this so that we can say goodbye to you exactly when the battery runs out. And so we're just going to stick with you, Chris, as time runs out. And they're increasing the P wave. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? Are you joking? But they increased the P wave. So we're just going to let it keep going, Chris. We're just going to let it keep going. We love you, Chris. We love you, Chris. And the other voices, we love you, Chris. We love you, Chris. And the P wave kept increasing to like a 6 or a 7, and then all of a sudden my organs start gurgling. And a lot of TIs, reported this. They can actually make, these air pockets in your body form. I don't know if it's cavitation or what, but it sounds like your stomach is grumbling, but only louder, and it happens all over your chest. So they were making my organs gurgle now. And that was the first time they had done that. So now the P wave's at like a 7 or an 8. The organs are gurgling. And then, I'm feeling my pulse, and it feels like my pulse is slowing down. And so they said, Chris, we're almost there. When your pulse reaches, or goes below, a certain number of beats per minute, you're officially dead. We just want to say we love you, Chris. And at that point, I'm like, what? Why did you do this? Why would you do something like this to me? If I'm going to die, let me live on the beach or something for a while. Why would you do this to me? So they said, Chris, there's nothing we can do. This is how we thought, this is what we thought would be best for you. So we could all love you. We could all say goodbye to you in our own special way and give you a send-off because, it's always about them. It's like this is what made us feel. This is what we felt like doing. This is what makes us feel good about doing this to you. That's what I was thinking. How could you do this? You're doing it for yourselves, And they said, your dad's here. And they kind of imitated him a little bit. He's too broken up to speak. And I'm just like, so I sat there, I crossed my arms, and I sat there in bed while the P wave continued. And I'm just, sitting there like, I don't know if this is real or not. And so finally, when I was supposed to be dead, this is about 10 minutes later, and I still wasn't dead yet. I said, I'm not dead yet, voice this call. And I said something that was funny, and they started laughing. And then that was the end of that treatment. So voice this call continued. And so at this point, they started torturing me relentlessly with thought insertion and thought reflection technology. So this is when, the torture continued, Chris, we're not here to help you. No one's here to help you, Chris. This is voice to skull. This is torture. And that's what torturers do. We're professional torturers. We torture for a living. So this continues, and now they start intercepting my thoughts and repeating them back to me without me even having a chance to finish them. And then injecting thoughts and what I call thought mirroring, when they kind of whatever you think of, they shoot back to you. Then you shoot back something, and it kind of creates this mirroring effect. Like if you're in the bathroom looking at mirrors, one in front of you, one in the back. It's just this kind of torture with your thoughts. They elicit a thought. As soon as it's elicited, it automatically repeats that thought back to you, or a different thought. Usually words, And so they're just agonizing, cutting you off every time you have a thought. And it was new to me, and I wasn't, I didn't know how to handle it. And so I said, voice to skull, I'm gonna kill myself. I said, I'm gonna make you stop torturing me. So I walked to the IKEA, And I went to the fourth floor parking garage, and I found this place where I could walk down the railing. One side I'd fall off to my desk, and the other side I'd fall off into the parking lot. And I told them, I'm going to walk down this railing until you stop torturing me. And it was so scary on the railing. I got up, my legs were just shaking, and I said, torturer, I'm going to walk down this part of the railing. It's about 3.5 inches wide until a certain distance, unless you stop, talking, until you stop torturing me. And I'm going to do it completely. If I fall off to the left, I'm going to get up and try it again. So that was difficult because you can't kind of lean toward the parking garage. You stay straight up. So I went down about 100 feet. I was so scared, and I made it, and I jumped off. I said, okay, that's it. And torture was nervous. The torturers were nervous. I jump on. They said, okay, Chris, are you sure you want to do this? I'm like, yes, I'm sure. I'm going to do this until you stop talking to me. Chris, you know how it is with Voice to Skull. We're torturers. That's what we do. We torture. And, so I got up. Okay, you're tortured. And so watch me do this. And I did that for 100 feet. I came back the next day. I added another 100 feet to it. I came back the next night, added another 100 feet to it. And this is, right there on the intersection of 101 and University. And there are parking lot lights on me. And I was nervous that, security guards could see me, but I stayed up there and did these walks all the way to 1,000 feet over the course of a week. But they wouldn't stop talking to me. They were just talking about other things. Chris, we know he's going to do it tonight, guys. He's going to walk those 1,000 feet. So this last night when I did the 1,000 feet, I got up there and I started walking, and I was really nervous about the 1,000 feet. But they all of a sudden I felt them put my hands out beside me. And then I felt myself walking kind of forward while looking straight ahead. Before I was looking down at the beam, at the railing, the cement railing. And so they were kind of helping me. And so I made the walk. And I thought, okay, they're kind of helping me with this. But they continued with these tortures, thought insertion, thought reflection, thought snagging. There's so many different names you can kind of call out for them. One remote neural monitoring torture is speaking slowly, like the sloth in Zootopia. Where do you think we're going now? Are we headed over to the left or the right? Are we going to let you die or live? That kind of thing. And so they were doing this, and I said, you better stop. And so I drove to the beach, and in Half Moon Bay, I found a beach, a secluded area at night where the waves were crashing really hard. I climbed up on the rocks, and I took a bunch of sleeping pills, and I said, you guys are going to stop. You're going to stop. And I would inch my way to the front of the rocks, right in front of right where the waves were breaking and kind of pooling up in a cove. That was just certain death for me. It was, Half Moon Bay is where the biggest waves in the United States are. So I was, right on the edge of the rock. I couldn't, they were still torturing me. And, I finally said, okay, I don't want to do this. I don't want to die tonight. As soon as that happened, this giant wave hit me, by the way, and I could barely stay on the rock, but I did. I went back home, and they were saying, guys, what are we doing torturing Chris? They always do that. Why are we torturing? Or do we really want to torture Chris? And so you think, well, maybe they'll stop, but they didn't. And so now, this is, the day after this experience, I actually went back to the next night to a different part and tried to wade into the water where the waves were crashing, but they were crashing too hard. It would have been instant death. So I stopped myself, and I came back. They wouldn't stop talking. These are my death threats. Death threats. Stop talking to me. Stop torturing me. I'm going to kill myself. So so the day after that, the second, experience with the waves, I went, Voice to Skull started chanting. I was back at my place, and they started this chant. It was the name of this woman I worked with at CompuCom and this ex-boss of mine, and they played up these characters in that East Palo Alto torture sessions with the celebrities. They played them off as this guy I used to work with was in love with her and didn't want her to be, my support system, and didn't like her masturbating me and all this stuff, and he was jealous, and I didn't believe any of it. But for this torture, they said, Robert and Lisa are screwing Chris, but not screwing, using the F word. Robert and Lisa are screwing Chris. Robert and Lisa are screwing Chris. Robert and Lisa are screwing Chris. And they wouldn't stop. They kept repeating that over and over and over and over. And I said, you better stop or I'm going to freaking kill myself. And so they kept going. It was really, a couple hours or something, 3 hours. And I know about the chatterbox, and I'm just thinking, oh, my gosh, if this is automated, I'm dead. So, it was terrible. They hit you with these combinations of that, with the P waves, and they're always manipulating you with these waves in some way. They're always hitting you. There's so many different waves they have that do these different, it's just techniques, torture techniques that they have. And so I went to the gas station and I bought gas. I said, I'm going to burn myself. I lived in Vietnam. I, read a lot about the Vietnam War. And I said, I'm going to pour gas on myself. And you guys are going to have to make a decision. Voice to skull, standing up for myself, really putting myself in the position of having to kind of do this, So I went to the gas station. They wouldn't stop with a chance. I bought the gas, bought a gallon of gas in a red container. I drove to a secluded, part of the beach, south of Half Moon Bay, and walked out to an area that was about 20 meters from the ocean. And I had shorts on, had the gas can, and had kind of a jacket with a hood on. And I had a beach towel, big, beach towel. And I was going to lay it down on the sand, but I decided to just wrap it around my waist and tuck it in. But you know how a big beach towel is. It's big. You tuck it in a lot of, kind of in your back and then also around your front. It tucks in kind of deeply, So I had the beach towel on. I had the gas. I kind of kneeled down on my knees, and I poured the gas on the beach towel on my waist. So covered the front and back, all on the sides, just went around, 3 times with the gas, blip, 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 blip. It was about 3/4 of a gallon of gasoline I poured out. And I said, this is it, torture. This is it. And I meant it, I said, I'm going to freaking kill myself, if you don't stop this. You have to stop. And they just continued with the chant. Chris isn't going to, Chris, you can kill yourself. You can do whatever you want. We're voice to skull, and then they continue with the chant again. Chris, Robert and Lisa screwing Chris. Robert and Lisa are screwing. So I took my lighter out and I held it right next to my knee, right next to this gas-soaked towel, and then all of a sudden I went into this trance, and I just thought, what? I couldn't really think. And this was the beginning of what is this Manchurian Candidate technology, where they can take over your thoughts and take over your body. And I was in the worst position I could possibly be in when they, revealed this technology. I knew they could move my hands. They had done puppet shows where my left hand's talking to my right hand, and I would kind of jump in and take over the right hand, and, because it was, I thought they were letting me go. This is a big reveal, so I would kind of have fun with it at some point. But I didn't put it together. I didn't think they were going to hurt me because they helped me walk down the parking garage railing, So I had the lighter in my hand, and all of a sudden I went into this kind of trance where I just started staring at the lighter. I just was staring at it. And then all of a sudden, my right thumb starts pushing down on the lighter. And I couldn't do anything to stop it. I couldn't believe what was happening. I just thought, oh my gosh, I'm lighting myself on fire. What is going on? And then I, felt my right thumb click the lighter. It was a roller lighter, and rolled the lighter, which is really strange. It just emitted all sorts of sparks and lit the first time, and it engulfed me in flames. And it just was this searing pain. I felt it rise from my feet all the way, up to my waist, and I towel, which had been tucked in so deeply. It burned, my hand doing that. It finally got the towel off, but I was still on fire. And I ran toward the water but slipped and fell. And I remember thinking, oh, my gosh, if I slip again, I'm dead. The fire, the pain of having fire, sear your skin, and was just so intense. And so I made it to the water, and I put myself out. Voice to Skull stopped talking at that point. They were just watching me die. And so I put myself out, and I was just like, I can't believe you did that. I can't believe you assholes did that to me. And, I'm like, oh, my God, oh, my God, oh, my God. I'm looking at my legs, and I'm like, skin's peeling back. If you've ever seen burns, the burns are white. And your layers of skin just kind of peel back. And I, my hands were just on fire and were hurting. And I was trying to find my car. I was trying to get back to my car, but it was so dark out, I couldn't find the path back, from the beach to the parking lot. So I kind of got stuck in these bushes, and I just thought, should I just sit here and die or what? But I somehow made it, back onto the path and to my car. I drove myself to Half Moon Bay and stopped at this, convenience store and just said, call the police, call the ambulance. I've been on fire. I've just been on fire. And so the ambulance came, and I went into shock in the ambulance, and so a helicopter came, or they got me to the first hospital. They got me to Stanford Hospital, but then they called a helicopter, Flight for Life, to take me from Stanford to Santa Clara because I guess, I don't know, I wasn't doing well. And so they airlifted to Santa Clara, put me in the burn unit, and I was burned on 40% of my body. I was there for a month in the hospital. I had, 4 skin graft surgeries. So, my legs were completely covered with burns and my butt, and, that whole experience was just, it was actually a great experience. I mean, they took care of me, the medication. It's pain, having your burns cleaned, and right after the surgeries, removing the staples and that kind of stuff was painful. But they, just the nurses and doctors were so nice. I couldn't say, I just couldn't say anything bad about that experience, considering what I went through. But the Voice to Skull stopped talking to me. I went to Arizona to rehab at my parents' house, which is where I am now. And my parents were with me. At the time, they had 2 houses, Colorado and Arizona. So they were with me for the first couple months of my recovery, burn recovery, which is long. Burn recoveries are very long. Your skin tightens up. You can't move, all kinds of things. But after 2 months, my parents needed to go back to Colorado. And the second they left the house, literally, the second the garage door closed, Voice to Skull said, hey, Chris, we're back. And I was tortured again. The torture started up, nonstop torture. I'm like talking to my killers, basically, and they were saying, Chris, these are experiences we just have to put you through. We can't explain why. They're just experiences we have to put you through. And, in some of these conversations, they were breaking down and crying. And so now they're torturing me for another 2 months at my parents' house. And then they jumped into one night another thought interruption torture that was just terrible. And at this point, I'm kind of thinking, the only way to deal with this is to threaten suicide or to go through with it. So I jumped in my car. I drove to Ensenada, Mexico, and I found a hotel by the beach. And I waded out into the water one night, and I said, okay, that's it, Voice to Skull. And they stopped me. They said, Chris, go back to your hotel. We're not going to torture you anymore. And so I went back to my hotel. But then they did it a week later. So this time I went into the water, I swam out, and I floated on my back, and I just sat there. And I said, you're going to stop talking. You're going to stop talking. And they, Chris, we just have, you don't understand, you understand, Chris, we're torturers. And, this is stuff that there's nothing, we can do about it. This is what we do. We're Voice to Skull torturers, Chris. And they just say that stuff to not make any sense, they were doing that, and I'm just sitting in the water. But I'm thinking to myself, fine, I'll just die. So I sat out there, and finally, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm treading water and floating on my back, and I'm really out of shape. I was out of shape, since Vietnam. I used to work out all the time, but I stopped working out in Vietnam and didn't work out at the car company, Lucid, where I was working. And then after this burn, was in the hospital motionless, bedridden for a month, and then bedridden for 2 months at my parents' house. And then another, I would spend, basically for the next 3 or 4 months, I was bedridden in Arizona. I would just get up to eat or drink. So I was really out of shape. So my shoulder was aching. I was tense. It was tightening up, and I couldn't breathe. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm dying. And I said, I'm going to get back to shore. And I tried to swim, but the current had taken me out, much further than I had thought. I think I said a quarter mile in one of these interviews, but it was, at least, a couple thousand feet, or maybe, 2, 3 football fields, 4 football fields, something like that from the, from the beach. But I was swimming and I couldn't get back. The current was pulling me out, and I just thought, oh my gosh, this is how I'm going to die, And I didn't think about anybody. I just thought, I got screwed in life. I really got screwed, and the water was getting in my mouth, and I couldn't keep myself above water, and I thought, this is the end of it. So again, voice to skull stopped talking. As soon as they knew I was kind of fighting for my life, they just kind of sat and watched. It's almost like they're experiencing it through your body. They want to feel what it's like to experience dying through your eyes, through your ears, through your body. And so somehow I just said, I'm just going to try it one more time, and I kept swimming until my arms stopped. I just have to swim until my arms just stop, So I kept doing it, and somehow I got to a sandbar where I could put my feet down and get air, and so I made it back to the hotel. And when I walked back to the beach, from the sandbar, the voice of scholars were crying, or John, the guy who kind of inhabits me, I'll explain that, was crying and said, Chris, I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to do that again to you. And I'm just like, you're a freaking asshole. Why are you doing this to me? Why are you doing this to us? Chris, we're just doing it. We're just doing it. We can't tell you why we're doing it. We're just doing it. And so those are the kinds of answers you get from voice to skull. So, I spent 6 months or something in Mexico, and they continued torturing me. And then, they started building up in the hotel room I was staying in this transformation to the Manchurian Candidate. And that is when, and thanks for sticking with me and letting me talk, that is when they started telling me, Chris, we're going to change you. The purpose of this experiment is we're going to convert you. We're going to transition you into a Manchurian Candidate. And I'm freaking out. I'm just like, what does that mean? What does that mean? Are you going to make me kill somebody? Are you going to, make me jump off the balcony? Is it going to go dark? Do I fall asleep? What is it like to be turned into a Manchurian Candidate? And they built that up for a couple of weeks. We're getting ready for the transition, and here's what it means. John was saying he's going to write a book about it, and Chris, whatever happens, we're gonna make sure you're remembered, but Chris, that's what science is. That's what science is. We have to cross these lines. We have to cross these lines, or science stops. And science never stops, Chris. Science never stops. Stuff like that. And I'm just thinking, gosh, why me? Why does this have to happen? And so I'm in the hotel room, and we're talking about, usually if I watch movies or something, they'll kind of tone down and let me watch the movie. But that's a rotten way to live. And, so they'd let me watch movies, and then when I stop, they'd start talking to me again, whatever. But I'm worried about the Manchurian Candidate transformation. And so one day I'm asking John, and what they did, right around the time they started torturing me in Tucson when I was recovering from my burns, they made it clear to me that there was someone inside of me, someone who could kind of wink my eyes it's almost like having another consciousness, inside of you. And it's the fourth speech person, but you're not quite aware that he's living in you, inhabiting you 24 hours. You just think he's speaking into a microphone, with the headset on, reading his EDG, his evoked potentials, and that's allowing him to control my mouth. You're just thinking in those terms. But now this person is kind of living inside of you, and he's trying. Sometimes he tries to kind of speak over you, but you're always aware of it. And so you're getting used to this experience. You never get used to it, but you're aware of the fact this person's inside of you, and he's talking back to you, and so you're just sharing your mind with somebody. And I was talking about these things. There's an article about twins, conjoined twins, that was just recently published, and I don't know if anyone's read that, but they talk about these two girls sharing a conscious, and that's what this is. They called it a thalamic bridge. So the thalamus is connected. Their thalamus are connected, and they call it a thalamic bridge. And so they said this is astounding to scientists because they've never been able to study, the two consciousnesses at once, which is just another indication of, look what we're going through, and look at what they are comparing this to. It's never been reported in science. It doesn't fit the description of multiple personalities. It doesn't fit the description of these mental illnesses, other mental illnesses, unless TIs describe it the way delusional disorder is described. We're going from voice to skull to forced speech to biorobotization to dream manipulation to sexual stimulation, and then these RNM, thought insertion tortures and all of these things. It's always happening in the same pattern to us, to the TIs. The similarities are exactly the same, and so we need to kind of communicate this together. We need to communicate what voice to skull TIs and other TIs suffering, from RNM technologies, are really going through. So it all kind of culminates in this Manchurian Candidate takeover. So I was in the hotel room, and I said, John, I named my inhabitor John. John, what is it going to be like? And he said, Chris, I'll just tell you. Here's what it's going to be like. I could, and all of a sudden I felt this energy, kind of that trance I felt when I was lit on fire. And my thoughts just kind of, all I could think about was what John was saying. I couldn't think of anything else. And John was describing, he was taking me through it. He said, well, Chris, it would happen like this. Then I felt the trance. And he said, I could move your arm like this, and he moved my arm. I could move your other arm like this and push you off the bed. I could move your legs down so they touch the floor. Then I could stand straight up like this. I could walk over to the desk like this. I could pull out the chair. I could sit down like this and then stand back up like this and sit back down and stand back up. I could walk over to the bathroom like this. I could walk to the front door and open the door like this. And you can't do a single thing about it, can you, Chris? I'm like, oh my God. And I was paralyzed. It's like being hit with a taser. I've never been hit with a taser, but I can imagine, the feeling is having a stronger electrical charge running your body. It's just a stronger electrical charge. You can't tell somebody to not think, to just try to change your thoughts or something to stop voice to skull. No. Just try to think about something else and your body won't be moved. No. It's not like that. These technologies, they can, hit you with a certain intensity that might allow you to clench your fist while they're still moving your arm around. But when they turn up the intensity, you can't clench a fist. You can't do anything. I couldn't even try to fall to the ground and to make this stop. Nothing would have stopped it. When they were hitting me with those waves in the car, I was clenching my fist, trying to stop it. When they were moving me back and forth, I could still reach over and light the cigarette. I still had some control. over my body, even though these things were happening. So I just assumed this biorobotization gave you, a certain, percentage control over your body, but it wasn't like that. This took me over completely, walking me around in circles, standing up, sitting down, and then he finally, sat me back down in bed and said, that's what we can do, Chris, and what are you going to do about it? They're always torturing you. They're always in this, we're going to kill you. You have, there's nothing you can do about it. So sometimes they lighten up, but then they always come back to the torture. So that's what it was like. Completely taken over, full Manchurian candidate. There's nothing you can do to stop it. But what I'm saying about this experience is that 100% what's going on. It's not imperceptible, So where I think they are now with technology, now I came back to Tucson here, and I'm about to move overseas. But for the last 5 months, they've been torturing me with, thought insertion and a lot of stuff that is right on the borderline of perceptible and imperceptible. And then I'll tell you one more story if I forgot, and then I'll be done. About 3 weeks after the Manchurian candidate takeover, I was sitting in bed, and they were voice disculling me and imitating a good friend of mine I went to high school with. And his name is David Scott. And this is the first time they had imitated David Scott. They had imitated one of David Scott's best friends, another high school friend of ours, who's also... Chris,
I just want to give you a heads up. We have like 30 more minutes left for the podcast.
Oh, okay. I'll wrap this up in 5 minutes with this story about Dave.
Okay.
Okay. So they've imitated David's voice, talking to me on Voice to Skull. I couldn't believe it. They do such a good job. I just thought, David, what are you doing with Voice to Skull? Are you involved in Voice to Skull? He said, Chris, a lot of us are involved in Voice to Skull. It went on for about an hour. Didn't think much of it. And then a week later, I find out David Scott died. He died of an aneurysm while taking a walk in Colorado on a cold day and died of hyperthermia. So I flew back to Denver. I couldn't believe what was going on. And on the way to the memorial, I got a haircut, and the hairdresser said to me, I was explaining to her I was on my way to a memorial. I'm kind of late. She said, "What happened?" I said, "Well, my friend passed away." She said, "How did he? What's the story, or how did he pass?" And I said, "Well, he died of an aneurysm while taking a walk, and then died of hyperthermia." And so she said, "Well, Chris, I would sure rather die of being left out in the cold than being set on fire. I should rather die of the cold than being set on fire." And I thought that was a strange thing for her to say. So, I just thought, what's going on? And so I went to the memorial, and I've explained this to Ella before. I've explained this to a few people. I won't go into it because it's so hard to describe. But this person, David, was a basketball player. He was a varsity basketball player, one of the best on the team. That was his sport. So we went to the memorial, and the eulogy sounded really strange. Like it wasn't at a funeral home. At a church, and there wasn't a graveside service. It was at a clubhouse in this neighborhood where he lived. So a lot of people there, and so his friend, our mutual friend Chamberlain, who played basketball with him his whole life, got up to speak at the podium, and he said. It was a short eulogy. I love you, David. I miss you, but I want to tell everyone about something that's really special to David. David loved soccer. He was an incredible soccer player, and he especially loved playing soccer for the Denver Kickers and the International Friendship Cup team. And so I want everyone to know, that's all David, used to talk to me about when we were kids, and in high school, was how much he loved playing soccer. And I was just dumbfounded because David was a basketball player. He never played soccer. Those two teams were competitive soccer teams, and I played on one of them. And David was nowhere to be found. He played soccer as like a 10-year-old. And so here's his best friend giving a eulogy where he's talking about David playing soccer. He was out of this world. So I've tried to explain that to people. And, when we talk about lawsuits and things like that, I explained this to Dibble. And, I just thought, they just kind of took down the information. And I thought, maybe they're all under gag orders. Maybe there's some way of breaking a gag order. It seems like, maybe my friends are involved, but over the last few months, I've kind of thought about it more, and I thought, well, maybe they were taken over. Maybe Voice the Skull just kind of took them over to torture me, to build up all of this anxiety in me. So that's the story. That's where I'll end it, and that's where we are now.
Wow, what a story. It's quite remarkable. Well, you seem very resilient, and you still seem to have your wits. So, kudos for that.
Yeah, what they're doing now is torture. It is hitting your brain. They're letting me speak, Ella. If you watch my videos with Ramola, my podcast, I can't find words. They hit me at different levels at different times, but they're kind of letting me tell this story. And they were kind of almost breaking up when I was talking about the burning and that stuff. But they hit me nonstop now, and they call it death do us part torture. You're in death do us part torture. And so when I hang up the phone, like the rest of us, who are going through this sort of experience, I'm being tortured. It's nonstop. Chris, what are you going to do? It's it's torture till you die. And why do you have to die, Chris? Because everyone in Voice the Skull, they didn't say that, but everyone in your position, everyone dies. And all of this stuff. And I'm not saying that to scare anyone. It's just how they're torturing me. And so that's where we are. And it's day to day with me. I mean, they keep me up all night long. I'm surprised they let me do this interview with you guys. But I think they know that I'm just trying to get my story out and, explain these things the best I can so that other people can understand them, and so.
Yeah. Well, they definitely didn't want you. They definitely didn't want you giving it on the radio show. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well,
but that's okay. Even this podcast gets a lot of views, so and this definitely will get out to a lot of TIs too. So, but would you have time? We have a little bit of time. Let's take some questions. Star 8, and I won't be able to get to everybody, and I apologize for that. So I'm going to go to. Is that okay? Do you mind taking a few questions?
Of course. I'm sorry if the story went on so long. It's just it's 13 years.
You have a very in-depth story, so that's completely understandable. Okay, so here we go. Florida, I'm going to come to you if you're still there. Hi, Florida. Yeah, she's had her hand raised for a while. So star 8 if you have a question for Chris. Okay, I'm going to come down to California. Hi, California.
Hi. He actually ended up answering my original question, so just thank you for a fascinating story, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you for saying that. I hope it makes sense. It's such an overt, over-the-top, V2K experience, that I hope people can kind of retell. The experience in East Palo Alto with the hand shaking, and arm shaking, and leg and torso shaking, one by one, that's what these, tortures are doing. It's so, if it helps anyone describe this to somebody else, well, look what it did to this guy, and then bring it into the Cuba story. This, if we can all kind of try to talk about this in the same way, mentioning the same similarities, the graduated revealing of the technology, that's what I hope, we can do together,
Yeah, I agree. And I'm sorry that your story is so horrific. They come in all different variations and different torture tactics, and I'm just so sorry that you've had such an in-depth and full type of program.
Well, when you think about the suicides, this is what they're going through. This is how it happens. They torture you to suicide all the time. It wasn't just those 4 times. You know, they torture you until you're on the razor's edge, and they either bring you back or they keep pushing you. And it adds up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it adds up. It's torture. Yeah. It is torture. They want to pull out, you know, stretch that as far as they can, you know, and make that experience as excruciating over the longest period of time that they can. And I think what ends up happening is people do what I'm describing. I'm going to, you know, jump off this, and you don't know. It could be an accident. A wave could have hit them. They could have gone out too far in the water, or, you know, pushed too hard on the trigger on the gun. You know, trying to tell the torturers, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this, and, you know, and all of a sudden, bam, you know, they went too far. They slipped. You know, the gun went off.
Okay, well, I have a question here from Connecticut. Let me go ahead and get this person unmuted. Hi, Connecticut.
Hi, this is Connie. Thanks for sharing your story. It's very fascinating, and it's really scary when you talked about how many times you tried to commit suicide, because it kept on making me think of Corey Dubin, who killed himself a year ago. It's terrible. And, you know, another TI said what made her really sick is that they were with Corey during his last minutes of life, you know, into death, which is disgusting. But their big kudos are when they can get somebody to kill themselves or do a violent act and hurt others or get incarcerated or go into a mental hospital. So that's not what we want to do. And I did hear that when we do die, they want our pineal gland and our irises because they want to know what this targeting did to us. But have you ever tried to detox? I mention this a lot on the calls because I'm heavily targeted and because I worked for the federal government. And but when you detox inside and out, because what they're putting on our skin is making us into like a transmitter and receiver. So like Kyle mentioned when he did the Lookout for Charlie 30-day detox regimen, his V2K dropped like less than 50% of the time. So definitely what they're spraying in the skies and putting in the food and the water and the smart meters. And, you know, definitely this stuff is getting on our skin, like biosensors. Usually they're behind the ear, in the ear, below the ear, on the neck, back of the neck, usually when you can't, places you can't see. And it's making us into transmitters and receivers. So have you tried to detox?
No, I mean, I've eaten pretty healthy. I haven't done any real, you know, detoxes. But, you know, it's hard for me to do that because, you know, my torture is so overt. It is just all day long conversations back and forth, you know, and it's followed me everywhere, to Cambodia. I rode motorcycles in this rural part of Cambodia, and they were talking to me the whole time, you know, talking about my lane changes and whether or not Hun Sen's daughter, you know, would want to ride with me. You know, Chris, you know, we're representing the U.S. here. We want to connect you. We want to help you with some connections out here. And I'm like, Hun Sen, daughter, what? Wants to ride on my motorcycle? So, you know, if it's in a rural area, if it's on an airplane, you know, it's just difficult for me to believe after reading everything Robert Duncan's written about this that, you know, electromagnetic waves, you know, can be stopped through detoxing. If it's nanotechnology, then I can understand that. But I have a feeling that I'm kind of going through what Robert Duncan has described, this, you know, through this means of voice to skull. You know, Dr. Horton sent me a chip reader, and it's come up negative. So I don't have any chips. But, you know, I don't mind. I'll give it a shot, anything at this point. So.
Yeah, I would urge you to watch the Lookout for Charlie video and just let you know there's some quicker and easier ways, but I know a lot of people use Epsom salt because a lot of the organisms they're using are worm-like and mites and worms and things like that, like the nano hookworm. And these really, once they get these things on you, they have so much capability of doing things to you. And I would urge you to try it because this stuff causes cancer and high blood pressure and all sorts of illnesses. And they're spraying it in the skies. 100% of the population is infected. It's really important for everybody to detox. But some of us, they're hitting us extra hard with this stuff. And I am chipped from head to toe. So, and I have 2 foreign objects in my eye, one of my eyes. But it's really important to detox because you do have nano in you because they're spraying it in the skies. And so anyways, things like garlic and sea salt and Epsom salt and baking soda and the orange antibacterial palm olive. But if you take the anti-itch cream from the Dollar Tree store or hot sauce, rub it on your skin. If all of a sudden your skin starts feeling like sandy, like gritty, those are the organisms embedded in silicone resin or poly resin. But most TIs I saw at the conference have biosensors on their neck and near their ears and temple and face and yeah. And if you take a black light and shine it on your body, see if it lights up.
Well, I've done a lot of that. I've certainly done the full chip search. I think people, we just have to, everyone has to understand that there are different methods of delivering these messages. And, I think the government is kind of setting everyone up for, so that they'll believe it requires a chip or it requires, some device that you put on your head. That's the big secret is that this is remote. It can be done remotely from, thousands of miles away practically. I don't know how close these base stations need to be, but let's say, 50 miles or so away or 100 miles away at least. So that's dangerous. That means that, the TIs who can't prove chips, have to kind of sit and hang in there, not knowing, whether or not Elon Musk's company or what Facebook does brings more attention to this. It might create ethics, a conversation about ethics and laws, but it might not cover the distance and the fact that there's no receiver inside of us, no nanobodies, that can kind of relay the signal. So that's my worry, is that that remote portion of it that doesn't require chips will never be revealed by the government or, won't be included in legislation. But I think it would. I think it would be. But yeah.
Yeah, and there's a couple of TIs I know who are getting ready to hire lawyers to file their cases, and they have quite a bit of evidence, and one's on the East Coast and one's on the West Coast. And the similarities are, of what's going on. Universities are involved, hospitals, doctors, NASA, the Air Force. It's like there's so many entities involved and how they're doing things and what they're doing. And I do know details. And so I would just urge every TI, even though our targeting is not the same, and even though they can use satellite technology and your smartphone and your anything chips that's near you, whether it's your car or the appliances in your home, I would urge every TI to look out for Charlie, because regardless of what you're targeting, you're experiencing, and even if you think you don't have biosensors and biofilm, it'll make you healthier, because that radiation they're pointing at you to do what they do is damaging to your body, and it's going to take a toll. So, but I wish you all the best, and I really appreciated hearing your story.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. That means everything to me. It really does.
Yeah. And don't hurt yourself, because of these people. That's what they want you to do.
Oh, yeah. I'm aware of it.
Yeah. Expose them, get a case against them. That's the route that I'm going. I'm going to follow these 2 other ladies that I know.
Well, thanks, Connie.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for the advice.
Okay.
So, Linda,
thanks, Ella.
hi.
Yes. Hi. Your name's Chris, right?
Yes.
thank you very much for sharing your story. It was very interesting. I have a question. You said that Dr. Horton sent you a chip checker or something like that. What did you call it?
Yeah,
a
bug detector.
Can you share with us what that is and how we can get one? That sounds wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a German company that makes it, and they accept PayPal. It's expensive, though. It's over $300.
Okay.
And let me see if I can...
That could be cheap in the long run, actually. I'm sorry, what do they call it again? What is it?
It's a bug detector. Let me read off
bug
the...
detector, okay. Oh, cool. And it checks for frequencies in your body or the implants? That's what that's about?
Dr. Horton describes, how these waves work. And she kind of talks about these chips having to relay a signal. And, and that, any sort of chip works on a electromagnetic frequency that these detectors can pick up. Now, that doesn't explain, the Robert Duncan kind of side of the technology, the way he describes it. Yeah. But if you are chipped, at least her demonstrations, if you've watched her videos, show the meter going off, when it's near her head and other places, and on her abdomen and her knee. So it's called a Keco, ACECO. ACECO,
okay.
Yeah, A is in apple, CECO. SC6002 MK2. 1 megahertz to 6 gigahertz RF tracer.
1 and 6 gigahertz. Okay. And the second part of after the EC. I'm sorry, I can't read my own writing. But is S as in Sam, C6002?
F as in C as in Chris.
F as in Frank and C as in Chris?
Yes.
I'm sorry. That means that. Okay. F. Okay.
6002. MK.
Right. MK2. And then 1 megahertz and 6 gigahertz. Is that right?
Yeah. So, those are the frequency ranges that.
Right. 1 megahertz.
Obviously.
Great. That's all right. I need to know you. I mean, I'm not real techno-savvy, so I appreciate your explaining it very much. Okay. And the company, and we find it. Is it only sold in Germany, or do we just Google that information?
It's a German company that you can just buy directly from them. I think if you Google it, it'll come up. If you have any problems, email me. I don't have the information right in front of me, the name of the company, but my email is Chris E. Burton, CHRIS, E as in Edward, BURTON @Yahoo.
Okay, and you're also on Facebook, and so am I, so I can find you there too.
Yep.
Okay, good, @Yahoo. Very good. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, too. What was your name?
I'm Linda Costanzo.
Oh, hi, Linda. Okay.
Hi. And I'm on Facebook, and I'll send you a friend request. Then we can talk on there, too. Okay? Nice to meet you, Chris.
Meet you, too, Linda.
Okay.
Okay, so on that note, guys, we're going to go ahead and end the call. So I want to thank everybody for coming to the podcast. And everybody, please get out there and talk about this in a toned down way, because we really want people to listen to these, listen to our topics. And the only way we're going to, I think, do this is just, talking, getting people on board with this, and getting people to look into this themselves. So I just want everyone to, pass out flyers, do what you can, and or have discussions, with people. And, there's ways you can do it. If you make references, if you have like Ted Gunderson's affidavit, Mark Rubio is on board with this. I think he's got a document somewhere floating around. But anyway, so, there's an after call. It's 125-472. Again, it's 125-472. And everyone take care. And Thursday we have a really interesting guest. Her name is Val, and she's an activist up in Canada. And I contacted her about 6 months ago, and she finally got back to me, and she's ready to come on and share her story. She's just a neat, neat lady. So everyone take care. Linda, I'll talk to you soon, and everyone be safe.
Hope you're well.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
This is for self-protection, if anyone, and I just wanted to kind of let you know that. And I said, why are you doing that? And so what was really suspicious is when his friends would come over, they would immediately, one time I was at the house, but had been dropped off by a friend and my car wasn't there. So I was in my room, but they didn't know it. He and his 3 friends came home and ran upstairs to his room talking about me. They said, oh, Chris isn't here. Oh, cool. Let's go upstairs. And they went upstairs and they sat behind the TV set and were giggling like little girls. And so, again, I didn't know what was going on, but and then another time when I was there, his friends, when I mentioned, hey, what are you guys doing? They just kind of looked at each other and started giggling, and so it was something that stood out. And whenever I talked about my company, they kind of rolled their eyes, kind of like, yeah, sure, Chris, like we understand, about your company. So I couldn't figure it out. And then we actually got into an argument, and I moved out, and he invited me back to his house to apologize. He said, Chris, I just want to apologize to you. Can you, would you like to come back and play some pool? And I said, okay. I just wanted to make sure things were cool, and I wanted to make sure he wasn't going to do anything. So when I walked in that night, he was with a friend of his named Curtis, and I walked in, and he said, Chris, have a seat. I just want to let you know you're being recorded. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, Chris, tell me about your relationship with Christopher. Christopher was my client and the acting, VP at Business Objects. I said, why do you want to know? He said, it sounds, you have kind of tell me about your relationship. What were you guys laughing about so much? And I said, well, that's none of your business. And he said, well, tell me about Claudio. And he brought up the name of a gentleman named Claudio Silvestre, who was the former CIO of Compaq Computer and of Business Objects. And Christopher and I would talk a lot about him. He's kind of a flamboyant guy. And we would talk about Vegas stories and these kinds of things. And so this was personal information. And I just said, Michael, just know that I'm not doing anything illegal, okay? Christopher and I are not doing anything illegal. And it was, and Christopher and I had talked about a lot of different things and happening in Silicon Valley, and there's a lot of bribery and stuff like that in Silicon Valley. So we've had a couple conversations about other people at other companies and rumors about that kind of stuff. But I knew that, and I didn't want Michael just coming to some conclusion that I'm doing something illegal. All Michael needs to know is Christopher had been a client of mine for 6 years. I met him when he ran IT for Levi Strauss. He ran IT for Qualcomm, and he's a very well-known person. So, pat on my shoulder for having a relationship like that with him. So I knew, and so then what Michael said is, Chris, I just wanted to let you know that I have this whole place wired. I have it all wired for sound and wired for video. So I know everything that you've been talking about. And I just said, what are you talking about, Michael? It was the strangest situation of my life at the time, just being stuck in this room with this guy telling me everything I've been talking about has been recorded. And I said, Michael, just like I said before, just know I'm not doing anything illegal. But it dawned on me now what was going on, because he had been videotaping me and my conversations, and then his friends and Michael would go to his room and watch these videotapes behind the TV. And they thought they had this big conspiracy, because I would talk openly with Christopher. And at one point, Michael said, Chris, I have a video camera in the owl on the front porch of my house, and which is his mom's house, not his house. And I thought about it, and I said, well, I had a conversation with, I think I thought to myself, I had a conversation with Christopher about the two of us taking a trip to Mexico after this project. So I'm just thinking to myself, oh my God, Michael thinks that I'm paying this guy kickbacks or something. That's how I got this business, and he's giving me a hard time about it. So I just left. There were no kickbacks paid. We were independent companies, and we could do business together if we wanted to. I continued. I was doing well, so I went back to Denver. I left that night. I just left. I didn't want to start a fight or anything. I just left. So, but that always stuck in my mind, and so I went back to Denver, where I owned a loft right by Coors Field, and I just rented it out so I could go back.
Time for Retargeting Podcast. I'm your moderator, Ella. Tonight we have another interesting guest. His name is Chris Burton. First off, if you're new to the call, please stay on, and we'll get you some additional support, some TalkShoe podcast numbers, and some helpful links and websites. This is a solutions and educational-based podcast, but the views and opinions of my guests are not necessarily my own personal views and opinions. Basically, I'm open to many perspectives and many views on targeting. So as I stated right there, they're not necessarily my own views, but I'm always willing to kind of adjust my opinions. And, I have an open mind, so I'm willing to listen to all points of view. And I want to share them with other people as well. My goal is that everyone can obtain something out of tonight, especially a feeling of empowerment. If you have any suggestions, comments, questions, or especially if you're in need of additional support, please don't hesitate to email me at tiangel2016@gmail.com. Again, that's tiangel2016@gmail.com. Sorry if I've been a little delayed in responding. It's been a kind of a rough couple of weeks, but I'm going to try and get back on the ball and respond as soon as I can to people. And if I don't get back to you, you can always try Terry at stopgangstalkingcrimes.com. He sometimes has a little extra time, although he's extremely busy as well. I just want to make sure that if someone's in need of support, that we can address it right away. Because some people really seem to be in crisis, and I want to make sure we can get to you and help you in any way that we can. So a little bit about Chris. Chris Burton was the founder of two Silicon Valley IT staffing and consulting companies and had an art gallery for local Denver artists when he became a victim of America's classified Manhattan District electromagnetic neuroweapons development non-consensual experimentation program. Trapped in a psychotronic research lab he could not escape from, he founded 3 charity fundraising companies in hopes of appealing to the humanity of the U.S. government, which chose to further the covert ambitions of its intelligence agencies and continue to program. Okay, so now he's here to discuss the neuroweapon technology and talk about V2K and also the possibility and creation of Manchurian candidates. And I believe this bio was written by Ramola. I just want to give her credit. Is that correct, Chris?
Oh, I wrote that. She asked me for something, but...
Okay, you wrote it. Okay, just want to make sure that I give credit to who wrote it. Thank you, Chris. Hold on, my computer's decided to restart right now. Okay. So anyways, Chris, I'm glad that we had the opportunity to try this again. We did try to have the radio show on Whistleblower Nation, and we did not have success. It seemed like we were being impeded in every angle. So anyways, I'm glad you're here, and this is your crowd, so we can, speak very frankly, and we're speaking to TIs, and hopefully some non-TIs on YouTube will get to hear this as well. So I guess one of the things I'd like to do is, kind of start at the beginning, even like maybe how you got into IT work, a little bit about you personally so they can kind of understand who you are and your background.
Sure. Well, I'm 45 now. I was targeted when I was 33. And out of college, I grew up in Morrison, Colorado, just outside of Denver. I went to University of Colorado in Boulder, and graduated with a finance degree. Out of college, I moved to Seattle and began working for a company called Aerotech, which is owned by a gentleman named Stephen Bisciotti. He owns the Baltimore Ravens football team. When I joined him, they were in a hyper-growth phase. So I learned everything about the, technical recruiting industry while I was at Aerotech. And then I was recruited out of Aerotech to an systems integration company called CompuCom, which was a lot like EDS. They were based in Dallas. They were $2 billion company. Aerotech now is the largest staffing agency in the United States. They're called Allegis Group. So when I was with them, they were about a $300 million company. So I learned how they were growing their business, by creating these branch offices, which are just really staffing agencies. They're just owned by Aerotech. So after a year working at CompuCom, I was transferred to San Francisco by CompuCom to work in their Bay Area office. And I joined up with my first cousin. And he had just left medical school. He was teaching physics at Mills College. And I talked to him about the business model, and we said, let's start one on our own. So I recruited some people from Aerotech in Seattle to come down and join us. And together we built our own staffing agency in San Mateo that was, in about 4.5 years, grew to 11.5, almost 12 million in annual revenue. We had multiple opportunities to sell the company, but we decided to hold on to it. And then that's when the dot-com bubble burst, and then 9/11 happened. So our growth kind of flatlined, and I went back to California. I had left the company for a couple of years, started my art gallery in Denver, went back because the company wasn't doing well, and decided to start a second company, and that was called Watermill Consulting. My first one was called Dedicated On-Site Consulting, second one Watermill. And so I knew what I was doing, had a funding source to pay for people, to handle payroll. And I was really doing well. I had a lot of clients, and when I started Watermill, I immediately got a huge account with a company called Business Objects, and was doing their entire ERP implementation, their financial ERP implementation, and some other modules, and was having a lot of success. So DOC grew really quickly, but my new company was growing even faster, and it was a lot more lean. So I was doing ERP implementations for Business Objects and a company called Dassault Systems, which owns CATIA. So these are two very high-profile, brand name companies, and I was doing their ERP implementation, which are the types of projects that an Accenture, would do. So I was feeling really good. Things were going really well, and then I noticed, and just interrupt me, Ella, if you have any questions. I noticed while I was living in California, starting up Watermill, that my landlord was spying on my conversations. I noticed him outside of my door, and this was a friend of a friend whose mom had a house, in Half Moon Bay on the golf course. So I thought it was a nice place to live, and I moved in with a friend of a friend. So I felt comfortable there, but I noticed the landlord, spying on my phone calls, and I didn't think much of it, except that he, was being nosy. But all of a sudden he started acting strangely, and, I thought about the calls I was having, and I was talking to my business partner. This was a consulting company, a gentleman who owned a consulting company who was working directly with Business Objects as practically at the CIO level, senior director, VP level. They didn't have a CIO at the time, so he was pretty much the acting CIO. But he was a consultant. He was working through his own company, and I was working through my own company. So he and I had worked together before when he was at eBay, PayPal. My company helped do their integration, and so he and I were good friends, and we would laugh a lot. And I thought, gosh, this guy's hearing our personal conversations, and maybe that's why.
Chris, I do have a quick question. Sorry to interrupt. You said he was acting strangely. What other indication did he give you that made you think he was acting oddly or strangely, other than the eavesdropping?
Yeah, well, he would start to kind of insinuate that I was doing something illegal. And
I see.
He, I think he was shocked that I just moved out there, needed to rent a room from him, and then all of a sudden had this second company with a bunch of clients and a bunch of business when, I was renting a room from him. He couldn't imagine how things could just happen so quickly for me. And this is a gentleman who had never worked in his life. He was 42 years old. His father was a patent attorney from Genentech who passed away, and his mother was a retired school teacher, but he had never worked. He had always lived off of money his parents would give him. So he didn't understand how business really worked, and I think he thought that my friendship with Christopher was kind of fishy, but he didn't understand the difference between a corp-to-corp relationship and a full-time relationship. Christopher was not an employee of Business Objects. So in the sales world, you're entitled to work with, to speak with your managers and laugh with them and take them to lunch and stuff. But in the consulting world, when you both have your own companies, you're allowed to work together. You're allowed to take trips together. So he and I had a business relationship that he had approved by the president of Business Objects. So we had our own consulting agreements and everything was fine. So he was just acting like, gosh, Chris, it seems like you're such a big shot, and I just, I didn't take offense to it. We were doing our own things, but, this is kind of what gang stalking and gaslighting is. This was the beginning of it. And at the time, I didn't understand what it was. So I just thought, why are you acting so strangely? One time he invited me into his room, and he was cleaning his shotgun. And he looked at me, and he said, to California and start this company. And
right.
So everything was going great. I had this client, 2 clients, had a bunch of contractors, high-level projects, and was doing wonderfully. And then, back at home in my loft, and then all of a sudden, one day, I started hearing this man and woman talking about me. And the man just said, so what do you think's going on with let me go back, because I put this in a certain sequence in my interview, so I want to stick to that. When I got back to Denver, everything was fine, and then I found out that my company was being investigated. So. Oh,
wow.
Yeah.
And investigated by whom? Investigated by who?
By Business Objects.
Okay.
Somebody had contacted a manager there anonymously. Or I found out later that it wasn't, but at the time it wasn't anonymously. But at the time I was told about the investigation, I heard an anonymous tip was given to a manager about you and Christopher having an improper business relationship. And so I thought, oh my gosh, that must be Michael doing this. So Business Objects, these are these Silicon Valley corporations. SAP bought Business Objects. Business Objects is a leader in business intelligence software in the world. So this is a brand name client, and I was doing their financials implementation, their financial ERP implementation, part of it, but had all the lead developers. So it's a very important project. So they have to investigate these things, and I'm glad they did, because they go through your invoices, they go through their your time cards and their internal time card system, and they match up everything. They know your rates, they know how many hours your consultants worked and what you billed for those hours. So once they completed the investigation, which was handled by 2 different parts of the company, I was cleared and Christopher was cleared. So because everything was great. I had actually lower rates than any other firm there, and all of our projects were successful. So that was just unbelievable to me. I just thought, oh my gosh. And I later found out that one of my contractors had actually given someone that information, but I never found out who gave, if the contractor had spoken to Michael or if Michael was involved at all. I had no idea. I was never told about the details of this anonymous tip. But the contractor was fired. I kept the project, and Christopher, the manager there, his consulting company kept the project too. And in fact, they brought him on full time not long after that to run IT. So everything was great, and I had, we had went through this embarrassing, investigation, but I, came out of it, and then all of a sudden, one day, I'm sitting in my home office, and I hear this man telling me or saying to another or out loud, it looks like Chris was cleared from cleared by business objects in the investigation, and the woman said, yeah, I guess so. So what do you think is going to happen next? And they just continued, like two people having a conversation about me all day long. And I didn't know what was going on. I thought it was my downstairs neighbor, but I lived in a newly constructed building in downtown Denver, cement floors, and there was no way I could hear someone from downstairs. They'd have parties and I wouldn't hear anything. So how could I hear these people? And so that was the beginning of the Voice to Skull. And so what has taken me years to kind of figure out is how to describe all of what Voice to Skull is, because a lot of TIs are going through the same thing and are finding it difficult to explain because you want to explain everything. You want to explain everything at once, and it gets jumbled together. Your brain can't handle it. So what I've, and so what I think I can really help the TI community with is to help us kind of get on the same page when we talk about Voice to Skull. What is Voice to Skull? We're all aware of what this program is, and I'll give you a quick rundown so you know kind of what I'm thinking and how I describe this to people. But, we know that the military is working on covert warfare. Everything's being transitioned to small teams of people, Navy SEALs, all of these special forces teams that go in covertly and go and come back out. So with all of these teams require tactics, the development of new tactics that they can use. And we saw an instance of that in Cuba. These are small teams using tactics. And if people don't understand how significant a new, newly developed set of tactics can be, think about the disruption in technology that's happening. Think about all of these things that are happening around us that are disruptive, that have changed industries. And it's not just tech. Things like fighting. I mean, think about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That disrupted fighting. It changed the way human beings fight and have fought for thousands of years. So when you think about what Special Forces does, they develop tactics. And when we, talk about, the American Psychological Association being connected to torture, we have to understand that the APA is the largest employer of psychologists in America. And so when we talk about Mitchell and Jessen and what they were what they lost their case recently for about, we have to look at just what the military and these intelligence services mean what they're doing when they're bringing in psychologists. They're developing tactics for harassment, tactics used by small teams to go in and harass. And so we have to kind of understand that. There's a quote, I think you guys have probably all heard it from these books that you might have read about psychological torture or this relationship between the APA and the military. But there's one gentleman, an APA member, and he let me say this again. He was an Army Surgeon General who was speaking to the National Convention of the APA's National Convention to defend the participation of psychologists in interrogation and in the military. And he said, psychology is an important weapons system. So when you're saying it's an important weapons system, you know that it's being developed, it's being used to develop these tactics. So that's what this gang stalking tactics are. So, I'm speaking to the TI community, so I don't want to, take all of your time, doing this. But, everyone kind of knows that there are examples of this now. Cuba's the biggest one, but there are examples of these covert military tactics that have kind of leaked out into the community. Just like the way weapons systems can leak out into the law enforcement community, so can covert stalking and harassment tactics that are used by covert teams. And so there are people like John Robb who have talked about coercive games. He's an Air Force pilot, Yale graduate, Black Ops mission commander, and he speaks openly about, America kind of transitioning, its intelligence agencies transitioning into this kind of private security model where private companies, use their own security services. And he talks about open source war and coercive games that actually talk about, providing monetary rewards, for gang stalking activities, tagging the target with paint, disabling the target's car, causing the target to lose money. All of these things can be rewarded with money. And he's talked openly about apps that can reward people for this kind of, targeted harassment, because that's how kind of the military works now, targeted harassment campaigns, covert operations. So that's the world we live in, and the electromagnetic weapons are just a part of that. But there are other examples. There's a German site called Pay Stalking. If you Google Pay Stalking, one word, you'll find a German site that talks about a group that pays monetary rewards for accomplishing certain stalking tasks and accumulating points. And, this is the kind of stuff that's on the dark web that is starting to make its way out on, into the public, internet. And certainly with Bitcoins and this stuff, we know what's going on. And then with Harvey Weinstein, that New Yorker article explains the relationship between powerful people and these private security companies. In that article, it says this company, Black Cube, would give Harvey Weinstein a dedicated team of expert intelligence officers that will operate in the U.S. and other necessary countries, a project manager, intelligence analyst, linguist, avatar operators specifically hired to create fake identities on social media, as well as operations experts with extensive experience in social engineering. That's a term that is brand new. Social engineering, people talking about expertise in social engineering, that's coming from the security industry. So these are these covert